was exercising and meditating and making sure I was eating what I thought was right, and learning and studying and just doing so many other things that perhaps from the outside looked like they were great for my well-being, but in actual fact were causing more pressure and stress. And so I actually went back to this old way of being for a few years until the cycle repeated itself, as it does if we don't change our behaviours. And this time I found myself in a different GP's office, actually an integrative GP, but things were much worse. So I was extremely tired to the point where I would pull up in my driveway and not be able to get out of the car and have to sit there for 20 minutes before I could muster up the energy to go upstairs. Or sometimes I'd have to come home and just lay on the floor. I couldn't even make it to the couch, lay on the floor for 45 minutes before I would do anything else. And even though I was really tired, I couldn't fall asleep, or I would be waking up at 2 a.m. And I unfortunately, when I'm stressed, get really bad cold sores, and I was breaking out with those often. I had the flu 3 times in about 10 months, and my body was sending me all of these signals and signs that I was burnt out and stressed. And I was just telling myself that it was normal because I'm a teacher and I had to wait till holidays before I could rest or really look after myself. And so this was a cycle I was in. And when I went to the integrative GP, so the second time round, she was amazing, and she actually started talking to me about things like my values, and was I working and living in alignment with my values, and how was I intentionally designing my day to support the life I wanted to live, and how was I resting, and how was I nourishing myself, and how was I finding ways to switch off. And this, even though I knew this cognitively, like even though I knew intellectually these were the things that you had to do, when she made me unpack them, what I realized was that I wasn't living them day to day. It wasn't part of my daily habits or routine. It wasn't embedded in who and how I was. And this was a big pivotal moment for me, because I realized some key lessons through this process. Definitely not immediately, not in the first session at all. And in actual fact, I didn't really unpack these until last year when I wrote my book and had to face the fact that this is what I went through, because I think for me personally, there was a lot of shame attached to identifying with this story, because it isn't how I would talk about myself or see myself, and it's not how I wanted others to see me. But by allowing myself to reflect on the story and then also the lessons along the way, what I realized was that there are some key things we can do for ourselves that we aren't identifying and we aren't talking about enough when it comes to our own individual well-being. And then there are things we need to do collectively. So I want to share with you, first of all, the 5 lessons that I learned when I started to reflect on my own burnout experience, and some of the big lessons I had to take on, which really perhaps weren't that easy, and definitely weren't nice in some ways. I had to reflect, and I had to own some things about myself that perhaps I'd been avoiding because it was easier. So the first thing I had to do was stop blaming. I had to stop blaming the system or the school or colleagues or my partner or whomever it was, the traffic I was stuck in, whatever it was, for how I was feeling. Because we each control our own emotions and feelings and the response we have to situations. And whilst, yes, at times we can't control the event, and some things can definitely be quite traumatic and aren't pleasant to experience at all we can do in any situation is control ourselves. So please know, I just have to caveat this by saying I'm talking about my experience when I was teaching, when I was working. I was safe. I wasn't in any immediate danger at all. And so these things make sense in that context, but in another situation, they may not. So I had to stop blaming other people for how I was feeling, or the fact that I wasn't sleeping, or that my mind was always racing, or that I was unwell, because what it came down to was that I needed to take responsibility for some of those things in my life that I was doing that was contributing to this stress and this burnout. And I needed to take responsibility for the action and change I could create. And that was a little bit hard for a while, because I think sometimes it's easier to just do those below the line behaviors of blaming, denial, justification, making excuses. Because when we're there, we don't actually have to take responsibility or take action or make change. So they were the first 2 big lessons. But to be able to move into action, I actually had to let go of thinking that I had to control every minute of my day and the level of perfectionism I was operating with. So I was someone that used to schedule my day from 5 a.m. till 9 p.m. to the minute. I could tell you what I was doing. And it had to look a certain way and be a certain standard. And what that meant was that if anything popped up that I wasn't expecting, or it didn't go to plan, or it didn't follow the schedule I'd set in my diary, I would feel like I'd lost control of everything, and I was really inflexible. And so this inability to be flexible also caused me a huge amount of stress, because I wasn't able to adapt. I wasn't able to go with the flow if needed. And I wasn't able to reflect on certain things because I was so adamant it had to be done a certain way and to this perfect standard. And so from that, I actually had to shift my mindset around what matters, what's important, what did I need to focus on, what did I need to pay attention to, how did I want to feel as a person and as a teacher, and who did I want to be, and what did I need to give my attention to, and what was I telling myself that I absolutely had to, when in actual fact, I didn't really need to do it. I was just, again, putting this pressure on myself. And so that was a huge step in itself. And that led to really changing my daily habits, to becoming more clear on, this is how much time I have. This is what I want to dedicate it to. These are things that align with my values. Learning to recognize those feelings of overwhelm if perhaps I fell back into those old patterns, and utilizing support networks around me, asking for help, using strategies like writing a list, which I know sounds very trivial, but it's actually really helpful. Writing things down and then saying, actually, do I have to do this? Am I telling myself I need to do this? Getting someone else to come and look at my list to help me prioritize things, because sometimes when we look at our own lists, everything is important. And really learning also that, the day doesn't have to be scheduled, that you need to leave space. You leave buffer space. You need to leave room for the unpredictable, and you need to leave room because energetically and cognitively throughout the day, we need time and space for ourselves to recuperate. And sometimes, especially as educators, because we're busy, 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 go, 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 we don't actually do that. And so I learned that with my daily habits, what I needed to start doing was planning in that rest, planning in that downtime, planning in those moments to go slow. And those 5 things were really big lessons. And if I'm honest with you, even now at times I find, especially those bottom 3, I can slip back into old habits and old patterns. So, the work of wellbeing is ongoing. It's continuous. This is not a list of things that if you just go and do them, everything will be fixed. It's certainly not that. It's insights into some of the things I learned, but also still am learning all of the time, because things show up in different ways. It's the level of awareness that you come to things with that allows you to grow and shift and change. And I think when we're talking about wellbeing right now, we often want to focus on what we can do, but in actual fact, we have to look at the cause. And this was a huge piece around, well, hang on, what are the things that are impacting my wellbeing rather than how do I fix it? So I want to throw over to you then, having heard a little bit about my story and the things I learned. And I think we have the option to use a chat box, and I think Brett might come back on and read out some of your answers. But when you hear the word well-being, and you can think about this in terms of your own professional or personal well-being, what comes to mind? How would you define well-being? What do you think about? What is it that springs and pops up for you? I also forgot to mention too, if at any point you have a question, feel free to pop it in the comment box.
Maybe while we collect some of those first questions, I have to say that for me, being a school director, busy, having the feeling that I'm giving my all for my staff, and some of them are not in the place where they need to be, I've often felt helpless about what can I do? What more can I do? I'm trying my best. Sometimes it even feels like the more I try, the worse it becomes. And the word well-being for me at the beginning, it just felt very hard to define, a little bit airy, a little bit let's hold hands and have a kumbaya moment. And I really wasn't aware of the steps and the hard work and the discipline that it takes to try to take care of yourself. So just to get that started, we have one of the first comments is when they think of what well-being means, it's a work-life balance, or feeling good about going into work each day. That's well-being. Another suggestion that is that well-being is a cue for me to pull my attention to my physical and mental health. Another
Mm-hmm.
comment, well-being to me is being able to meet your own goals. And I
Mm,
find that one interesting because when I look through your
it's nice.
book and you were talking about your schedule, starting at 5 a.m. in the morning and going through the day and not really having a moment's rest. I mean, you had a plan for the day. You had a super plan for the day. If I could follow your plan
Too
of
much of
wake
a
up,
plan.
leave for the gym, do weights and cardio, drive to work, arrive home, I don't know, unpack, prepare dinner for the kids or whatever. That sounds like it can be a problem trying to meet goals as well.
Mm,
If
yeah,
there's any more
yeah.
comments, keep them coming. As Amy said during this presentation, we will take some breaks from time to time to see if there's a question that we can put out there or a comment. So if there's any more ideas of what well-being is, please go for it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And thank you for your input and ideas and answers and what it is to you, because they're actually, uh, well, whilst there's no one answer, there's also no absolutely right answer and there's no wrong answer. So if you do a quick little Google search or get some images off Canva, which is where I like to do all of my presentations, and you put in the word well-being, you will find a plethora of words, images, frameworks, and this little, the box here I've got with the 9 graphics, that's actually just a Google image search of school wellbeing frameworks, and they're the first 9 that popped up. And what you'll notice from all of these is that they're different. They're all very different, and they all use different words and different ways of looking at wellbeing. And I think when we talk about well-being, especially for teacher well-being or educator well-being, staff well-being, one of the complexities and challenges is that it's different for everyone. And so we're not really talking about the same thing. And so when we hear statements like we need to improve teacher well-being, we need to fix teacher well-being, we need to focus on teacher well-being, I often ask, well, what is that? What is it? What do we mean when we say that? And each individual can have their own definition, and I have a definition that works for me, and I would encourage, if you haven't done that, to explore and play around with that and consider what well-being is to you, a bit like a vision statement in a way. But also, as a school and as a collective, what I encourage schools to do as a whole staff is create a shared definition of well-being, because then when we're working on that, or when we're doing a strategic plan, or we're creating an action plan to support staff wellbeing, or we're simply talking about it, we're all coming from the same place. And what tends to happen is, once we start to unpack definitions and consider what wellbeing looks like for teachers and in the workplace, we start talking about who we are as people and then how we work. And it is this mesh and it is this blend, but it's certainly something, and this is what I cover in the first part of my book, and we'll look at it a little bit more now, to explore and become familiar with what the science says, what the research says, and some of the definitions out there in regards to well-being. Because what tends to happen is, like you've heard me explain, and like the schedule I run, is that we want well-being to be this nice straight path, this like sitting in your car and putting into maps where you want to go from A to B, and it works smoothly and you arrive at your destination. But in reality, that's not really what well-being is like, and it's not always what driving a car is like. We take a wrong turn, or we get every red light. That happened to me today, actually. Every red light, couldn't believe it. Or the road we want to go down is closed, or there's extra traffic, and so we're continually having to pivot and turn and rethink and reshift. And that is exactly what the wellbeing journey is. Yes, we might get to a destination, but also that's not the final point. We keep moving, we keep growing, we keep changing. Circumstances change, things look different, and in a school setting, priorities might change, staff change, students change, the system tells us we need to focus on something else, and so we're always changing. And I know that lots of the focus of this conference has been around AI, and that's a huge change in what we're seeing in education, and it's another reason for us to reconsider, well, actually, when we're talking about huge changes around how we work and what we know our profession to be, and it's part of an identity shift, we're also looking at our beliefs, and we're looking at values, and we're looking at how we want to feel when we come to work. And so I think we're not paying enough attention at the moment to how these things impact well-being, and instead we're often waiting until we're feeling really stressed. So I want to draw your attention to this. So this is two separate definitions of well-being, actually. One is around subjective and one is psychological, or hedonic and eudaimonic well-being. And in the brackets underneath there, you'll see I've got the definitions from the American Psychology Association. And I stumbled upon these when I was doing my positive psychology studies. And it was said in our training that one of these is not better than the other, and one is not right and one is not wrong. And often even the experts can't agree on which one is more important than the other, or which one holds more weight or value. And so when I was doing my research and study, I started to ask, well, what does this look like in a school context? What does this look like for staff? And you can see that subjective well-being is designed for us to focus on happiness. It really is about avoiding pain. So not feeling stressed, not feeling overwhelmed, not feeling burnt out, not feeling any discomfort. And it's that pleasure attainment. So the quick fixes, the things that we do instantly to avoid pain and feel pleasure. So you can think of this like mani-pedis or massages, or cancelling meetings, or putting on a morning tea, or having a social gathering, the things that make us feel good. And often that is what schools do really well, and that is where they start their wellbeing journey. But what we're hearing more of now, especially, this is what I hear in the work I do, is that whilst these things are lovely and we appreciate and value them, and yes, we need to keep them because they build connection, they're not actually addressing any of the things that are impacting or causing well-being to be poor, or well-being for people to feel low. And part of that is because when we do activity-based well-being strategies, we're not addressing the psychological aspects of well-being. So our psychological well-being it's not as easy to be able to achieve because you can't do it. It's not an activity. You can't outsource it. This is definitely more the long-term, embedded, sustained approach to well-being. And it is very much around things like autonomy, growth, purpose, meaning, positive relationships. And it takes time to build that. So when I think about this in terms of, well, what does it look like if we take it into a school setting or a workplace setting? The subjective well-being is that very short-term, extrinsic doing strategy that we engage in because it's comfortable, it feels good, we like it, it boosts that positive emotion. We want to have those things, but they're very fleeting, and they're often there because we might notice staff are feeling flat, or we might notice people are overworked, or ourselves, we might, one afternoon or a Friday or a weekend think, I just need to do something to make me feel better. And what isn't being addressed as well are things like fulfillment, meaning, engagement, growth, purpose, connection, that long-term intrinsic psychological aspect of well-being, because it's harder to achieve. And often too, when we start to look at these things, we have to reflect on how we work, our systems, our structures, our processes, how we engage in the work that we do, how we utilize our curriculums, the pedagogy that underpins our practice. And if we start to question, well, is this fulfilling for us? Is it meaningful? Are we growing as professionals? And if that answer is no, or not as much as we want, then we're starting to go into the identity of our school culture. And we're starting to move down the path of, do we need to change things? And that's a big conversation. And it's also a big change process to lead. And this is why now what we're seeing in schools is perhaps some of the things we've been addressing in the well-being sphere so far not be sustainable in terms of supporting staff, because whilst they feel good, they don't address the things that cause well-being to be low. And so we have to start asking, are we fulfilled in the roles that we do within schools? Do we have meaning, and is our work meaningful? How are we engaged? How are staff engaged? How do we engage with our teams? Do we feel like we're able to grow professionally? Do we have purpose in the work that we do? And is connection and positive relationships fostered? Because without that, we're kind of going through the motions. We're hoping things will be fixed just by putting some chocolates out on the staff room table, and those two things don't go together. The other definition I want to draw your attention to is this. This comes from the World Health Organization, and it provides a definition of well-being that I think allows us to really expand in terms of our knowledge and what we think about with well-being, because it's got a lot more meat to it. And so this says that mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And I think this really sums up what it's like to have flourishing well-being. And if we're functioning well, we do these things. Those four key points that I've bolded there for you. When we're in a place where we have our well-being in a balanced point that is working for us, we're able to do this. And when we consider what this looks like in our workplace, we're making decisions that allow this to happen. So this is really important. Our well-being has to support the work we do, but our work also has to support our well-being. It's not one or the other, they go hand in hand. And so I've taken this definition here and pulled it apart into those four key areas. And using other aspects of positive psychology and well-being, I've drawn in here what this looks like. So if we have staff or teachers or a workplace that values individuals who realize their own abilities and work with these, then what we're saying is, these people, we have people who work to their strengths. We have staff who work to their strengths. And I think in schools, sometimes we don't do this so well. We have everyone doing the same thing. Every teacher has to plan. Every teacher has to assess. Every teacher has to put data on a spreadsheet. Every teacher has to create resources. And in actual fact, there may be some teachers who love the planning side but don't like resourcing, or there may be some who love the resources but don't like the planning, and there may be some who are far better at thinking strategically and others who are far better at thinking creatively. And so why not start to allow our staff to work to their strengths, things that energize them, and allow them to find that balance point with each other rather than everyone doing the same thing. And when we talk about coping with normal stresses, education has many, I think, normal stresses, perhaps more than another job. And it's asking ourselves, first of all, what are those normal stresses in a day-to-day teacher or school life role, whether it's students turning up late or students and behavior, or whether it's around, the fire alarm going off in the middle of the lesson, or whether it's around report writing time, where that's usually more stressful. And really being aware of what are our resilience strategies that we use and that we're engaging with on a daily basis, not just when things, have tension, but resilience is a practice that we engage in all of the time. So how do we support staff to engage in their emotional, their physical, their relational, their mental resilience strategies daily? And how do we support emotional regulation? How do we foster that psychological safety and allow people to talk about their emotions and how they're feeling without judgment, and also use that to provide strategy, to provide a way to think openly and creatively? And when we consider the idea of working productively, what this says is we have ways in our workplace which allow our staff and allow our educators to work efficiently, effectively, and with ease. The 3 E's. I'm also adding in a fourth one, which is about being energetically sustainable. So when we're thinking about productivity, it's not just doing things fast. It's actually ensuring that the way we work, so our systems, structures, and processes allow us to work with efficiency. So we're doing things in a time frame that is reasonable. It's not taking us a considerable amount of time or too long. We've decided that it should take this much time, and it is. It's also effective. So the tasks we engage with serve a purpose. We know what that purpose is, and how we go about it is effective, and the outcome is also effective. And when we do these things, we can do it with ease. It is energetically sustainable for us. We don't get to the end of it and feel completely depleted. We don't struggle with it immensely so much that it's keeping us up at night. We, of course, if we need to learn a new skill, that comes into play, and we might have to ask for help or have support or collaborate, and we should be doing those things anyhow. But for the most part, we want these tasks to be done with ease. That doesn't mean easy. It means energetically we can do them with ease, and that energy is sustainable. And then the last one is around contributing to community. And when I consider that, what that really is how do we engage in the work that we do with our teams and with our wider school community? If staff have flourishing well-being in the workplace, so in the school setting, then they're engaged in the work that they do. They're an active participant in their practice. They're an active participant in the school community. And these 4 areas really bring together what it looks like when well-being is functioning and flourishing. And it is different to what we do. It is different to perhaps looking for a list of activities. It is a different way of looking at well-being instead of a strategy or something to be able to do quickly or in terms of your extrinsic, is that the right word? Extrinsic motivation. This is definitely more about our intrinsic and internal motivations and how we work, not just for ourselves, but also with each other. So I'm going to take a little pause here, I think. Yes, I'm going to take a little pause here and have a sip of water and just check in if anyone has any questions or comments.
Get my mic on. We don't have further comments except for another definition of well-being, which to Renata Palichkova is taking care of your physical and mental health and trying to bring together all that contributes to a better quality of our lives. Sounds easy?
Sounds simple, but very complex, because this, like, what contributes to healthy and flourishing well-being in your life and what contributes to mine might be different to someone else's, definitely will be. And it's figuring out what that is for you. And often what happens is we tend to look to others, or we look to social media for the answer. And I think when we go on this journey, and as I shared, there's a really a deep piece of work that needs to occur where you ask yourself, well, what is it to me personally first, before we seek to take on others' opinions or other ways, or looking at the teacher next door and seeing what they're doing. Or my partner does triathlon, and I can tell you right now, I've done one triathlon event not too long ago, and it's not for me, and I will not be utilizing that to take care of my physical well-being. And so sometimes we can think, oh, I have to do what the other person is doing because it works for them, but that's not always how it is.
I also think for myself, if I look back on my own life, my understanding of my own well-being has changed a lot over the 30 years that I've been involved in schools. And, when I first came here as a university graduate to start teaching, to the position now of being responsible for a staff of 50 and almost 200 kids and all of their parents, and the hygiene office and the lawyers and the ministries of education. And I have 2 little kids of my own. And boy, it's that definition of well-being is constantly evolving for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a great thing. We should be reflecting on it, because otherwise we're holding on to something that doesn't serve us anymore. And that creates more stress and tension and resistance. And we've got to learn to be able to pause and say, hang on, is this still working for me? It's like in a school, we want to be reviewing how we work all of the time and ask, is the way we're working supportive of our students? And I think we definitely do that. But we also need to now start asking, is it supportive of how our staff work? We've got to be open to reflect. Rather than doing this, which is, I think, what we see a lot of, we wait until we get to this point. We wait until we have our head in our hands, when it's falling apart, like I shared earlier in my story, before we do anything. And we have to start seeing well-being as an opportunity to be proactive and prevent this from happening, preventing burnout, preventing stress. And the way we do that is by identifying those resistance points, identifying early those things that keep you up at night, or those things that actually aren't working, or the things that aren't allowing you to work to your strengths, that aren't allowing you to be productive, that aren't actually efficient anymore. Maybe they were, but maybe they're not right now. Or when we notice that engagement is starting to slip, we need to address it and say, what is happening? Why is this happening? Rather than thinking, oh, everyone will be fine after holidays. We have to start to think and understand that it's not about just addressing the symptom. We have to look at the cause. There's a great saying, and I apologize, I don't know where it comes from, but it's not about pulling people out of the stream. We have to start looking at why they're falling in. So it's not about rescuing the person who's got their head in their hands on their desk. We have to ask, how did you get here? and what can we change so it doesn't happen again. And that doesn't mean that as soon as we embark on a change process to improve staff well-being, that the next day everything's going to be solved, or the next cycle round we have all of the pieces where they need to be. What we want to see is gradually over time it gets a little bit easier and easier, and we get better at identifying these stress points, or these points that might cause overwhelm or friction or resistance, and that over time we're more able to recognize them early. And we're also establishing open, connected, safe communities that talk about these things frequently. Because what we want to do is we want to reduce things like stress, burnout, and overwhelm. We know that. But what do we then want to increase? Because we are quite good at the moment at saying we don't want to feel stressed, burnout, or overwhelmed, and we need to address these things in the education setting. But then if that is the case, what do we need to do? Well, we need to increase purpose, connection, meaning, fulfillment, autonomy, productivity, engagement, positivity. We need to strategically be thinking, how do we increase these things in our environment, personally and professionally, rather than just aim to reduce certain things? Because if we focus on only reducing certain areas, what we do is we lean then towards that subjective well-being side. So we look to those band-aid solutions or those quick fixes where we're just pulling people out of a stream and rescuing them, rather than actually addressing the cause and saying, well, how do we build people up so that this doesn't continue to happen? Because as I mentioned before, our well-being needs to support the work that we do, and our work needs to support our well-being. It's not one or the other, and it is not about thinking, I'll wait until I get my work done and then I'll look after my well-being. It's continually reviewing, how do we work as educators? How does our school work? How do we operate? How do we utilize systems, or how do we behave in a certain way, and does it support well-being? Does it support the well-being of all? And does my own personal well-being, so in my framework I talk about resilience, energy and function, and emotional regulation in terms of personal well-being. And so it's considering, am I doing what I need to be able to have my well-being in a place where it supports the work I do? They go hand in hand. And so I want to share with you very quickly my framework. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this I unpack this in my book. But what this does is it brings to light areas of well-being that help us as staff, as teachers, as educators. And so when I went through the process of writing my book, I did a lot of work, first of all, on my own experience and thinking, what is it that I wish I knew at this point in time when I was experiencing burnout? What do I wish I could have supported others with, and what does the research tell us? And so there are two main areas to well-being: our everyday or our personal well-being, and then our workplace or professional well-being. And the everyday well-being aspects around energy and function, resilience and emotional regulation, they are your areas. Only you can control those. You can't outsource them. Someone else can't do them for you. You need to learn and master these for yourself, so that when we step into the workplace wellbeing aspect, what we're doing here is focusing on engagement, productivity, and performance and growth. And these three areas came out of some research that was done during COVID and the mass resignation that was happening. And they did research around what kept people in a job. If some workplaces were losing staff, what was going on in those workplaces where staff stayed? What were they doing to support wellbeing? And these were the three main things that popped up, among other areas. Staff were engaged in the work that they were doing. They felt productive, like they were actually getting stuff done, and that there was a level of performance and growth that they felt that they had. And these three areas really link to psychological well-being, and that's important to note, because we often, when we get to workplace well-being, can think that it's about what we do, and it's about making sure that staff are happy, or making sure that staff don't feel stressed, or making sure that staff have time to connect with one another. And those things definitely do come into play here. But we also want to consider around engagement. It's not just connection, it's actually engagement in the work and connected with colleagues. So those other things fall under these layers. And when we talk about our everyday well-being, too often we hear things like physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, and they are linked to these. So a holistic approach is around mind, body, and soul, But then, of course, we have our physical well-being, which is energy and function, our emotional well-being, which is emotional regulation, and mental well-being, which is resilience. And to really bring this to life, what we want to be able to do individually is build our efficacy, our own self-efficacy, to know that we can do this work and we can make an impact here. And it's important that we look after these key pieces for ourselves. And our workplace does need to support that to happen. But we also need to build collective efficacy. So the belief that everyone plays a role. It's not one person's job. It's not a leader's responsibility. It's not a wellbeing team's, only responsibility to work on staff wellbeing. Everyone plays a role in what it looks like. And so the collective efficacy that we use when we talk about student learning and students also applies to how we work on staff wellbeing. We all have to collectively take that responsibility and build collective efficacy. So I'm very quickly just going to cover 5 ways to support individual wellbeing and workplace, and then we'll wrap up. These are in my book, so I'm not going to go into detail. But 5 ways you can support your own well-being and focus on your everyday well-being are: consider how to build positive emotions. And there are certain things you can do, like listen to music or exercise or spend time with family and friends or be in nature. Those things boost positive emotions. Taking responsibility is something I talked through already in regards to my own experience. So maybe you can apply that. Practicing self-compassion. So as we've mentioned, there's no right way or one way, and things evolve and change, but it's acknowledging where you are, first of all, and knowing you've done the best you can up until when you're reflecting, and then asking, what do I do next? And then, of course, setting boundaries, knowing what you want or don't want, how you want to work, how you don't want to work. If you don't want to check emails at home, then putting a boundary in place to say you don't do that, but making sure you do them at work. And then creating those sustainable habits that support well-being and support you to have effective everyday and workplace well-being strategies. And then as a whole school, when we're considering, well, how do we support staff wellbeing, we want to be providing ways to build those positive relationships. We know positive relationships increase things like engagement and productivity, and we need that. You also want to have a clear vision with supportive goals, so know where you're going. And this is why having that shared definition of staff wellbeing really matters, because otherwise we're all talking about different things. You want to utilize staff strengths. So we talked a little bit about this, but really it's considering what are strengths of staff and how do you start to build that into the way your school operates. Have strong infrastructure. So your systems, your structures, your processes, the infrastructure that allows your school to function, and then foster flexibility where possible. And I'm not sure what's happening internationally at the moment, but I know in Australia we have schools really pushing the boundaries in this with flexible start and finish times, and some schools even going 4 days a week. So I think we're starting to see post-COVID what other workplaces were doing and thinking, well, actually, it's time for education to evolve, and so how do we become more flexible as well, which I think is really exciting. And I just lastly want to leave you with this. Instead of asking yourself, what do I need to do, or what can my school do, I want you to use this algorithm. How do you want to feel? How do you want to feel personally, or how do you want your staff to feel? And then who do you want to be as a person, and who do you want your staff to be? Once you know that, then you'll know what to do. It's not about focusing on what to do all of the time or focusing on strategy. We have to understand that well-being is culture work, it's people work, and it is about being. And we've got to know, how do you want to feel organized? Do you want to feel energized? Do you want to feel connected? Do you want to feel present? And who do you want to be? Do you want to be someone that is self-aware? Do you want to be someone that is helpful? Do you want to be someone that is kind? Do you want to be someone that is patient? And if they're the things that you want to be bringing to your own personal and professional space each day, what do you need to do to allow that to happen? That's where the real answer lies. So I think that is the end. I think I'm right on time. Maybe I'm a little bit over. But just, this is head and heart work. So be kind to yourself. It's certainly not all about strategy. It's definitely about patience and self-compassion. So if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to pop them in the box.
If I could start, I don't want to let you go quite yet. And I'd like to ask, as a school director, I think one of the challenges that we have, and I would say this is probably across the board as an association of IB schools, When I'm bringing new staff into the school, there's just so much to get your head around if you haven't been exposed to the IB in the past. And I think one of the things that we're consistently facing is new teachers that arrive very enthusiastic. They really like the idea. They like the core of the IB. They like the mission of our school. They want to be a part of, making the world a better place and balancing against some of the craziness that's going on in the world now. And yet that pressure mounts and mounts and mounts. So for me, as a school director, any thoughts for where I might reevaluate how I'm helping to bring people in and not feel so much stress right at the beginning, not feel that need that everything has to be perfect right off of the bat?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've taught in an IB school, so I understand that. I can remember when I first started. And I think whether it's IB or a different pedagogical approach, I think first of all is that we need our educators stepping into new environments to have time and space to absorb some of those things. And so instantly what I am thinking is that we've got to understand that it's a transition period. And whilst we might want everything to be perfect and people to know everything straight away, that's just not the reality of it. So I would suggest almost like a flow chart or a guide or a progression of what staff can do when they first come on, and after a certain number of weeks, what you'd be expecting them to know and be able to start to embed and use, and then where would that go next, and what would that progression phase look like. So giving them permission to, yeah, you have to learn, but actually you don't need to learn it all right now. You just need to know this bit, and then after that, this bit. And then you could even, if able, layer that with, and these are some teachers that do this really well. So, go and watch this person teach, or this person's going to run a session on this to help you, or we're going to come in and we're going to have a look at how you go with these elements, and then we're going to give you some feedback. So it's, we're so great with students at doing gradual release. I do, we do, you do, and little bits. And I think what we do for our students, sometimes we need to actually say, hey, this is actually also a great practice for us as educators when we step into a new space or when we're learning something.
Absolutely. And I would say, thank you, because I think my first reaction to your suggestion is, we do make an effort, for example, in our preparation week before the school begins to onboard everybody, but it really is a huge amount of information to adjust to. And as just, you're talking about a flow chart of progression, that might be something that I can talk about with my staff to really define stuff and map it out, because we can encourage our new staff until we're blue in the face and tell them it's okay, you don't have to know everything, at this moment, it'll come and stuff. But maybe without that flow chart of like, okay, by now you should have this, and how do you feel about that, and that reflection. So I think I'll be talking with our senior leadership team on how we might try to implement that at a little bit higher level in the future, and try to help keep the stress level of people down. And I'm sorry, you may be hearing one iPhone that's on now. Maybe I'll try to mute. There we go. Sorry, somebody jumped in right in the middle. If there's no more questions, I would just tell you have about 10 seconds to get your question out there before I will have to conclude this session with Amy Green, and especially if there's anybody from the Ostrava International School who'd like to take this chance to take a dig at their director, this is your chance to go live around the world with any thoughts that you may have. And while we wait for that, I can see that Amy has posted another slide. So Amy, go ahead.
Yep. If anyone has any questions or anything, please feel free to email me. My inbox is, always available. And you can find me if you're on social media, LinkedIn is the best place to be able to see some of my work as well. So I don't have that on there, but definitely go on Amy Green. You'll find me.
Yeah, you will, and a suggestion to my staff and to the staffs of all of our members in the association. LinkedIn really has in my view, become the place for serious professional development and making contact with people who care about what they're doing. So, yeah, if you're not on LinkedIn, it might be a good chance for you to find a lot of amazing things about what people are doing in the world to deliver the IB, lower our stress levels, have a bigger sense of satisfaction with what we're doing. With that, Amy Green, I'd like to say a big thank you for staying up late tonight and joining us. Thank you for your presentation. Best of luck. And I can imagine we might be in touch in the future. Some of our heads of schools might be reaching out because I think well-being is such a huge issue now for all of us. And we should probably be organizing a little bit more professional development in that area as well, to take it seriously. Thank you again for joining in.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
So we'll be continuing in just a few more minutes. Lauren Sayer will be joining us. She's also staying up late in Australia. But before we bring her on, we'll take a little pause for a moment, and I'll try to get the interview and her screen share set up so that we can get going. Hello again, everybody. We're about to start our second session for today's ACES annual general meeting. My name is Brett Gray. I'm the board chair of the Association of Central European IB Schools. We currently have about 40 schools spread across 12 European countries. Each school, of course, is an IB school. Some of the schools are IB continuum schools. And my day job is as the director of the Ostrava International School in the Czech Republic. Our next guest, Lauren Sawyer, also is joining us. Lauren Sayer is also joining us from Australia, where I guess we've just ticked past midnight, and so it's a long day for Lauren. And before I bring her on, I just would like to say, as Amy Green was mentioning in the previous session, LinkedIn really is a very powerful place to learn a lot about what's going on in the world of education. And this is actually where I first came across Lauren in early January, when she had posted that she was organizing a series of workshops to discuss what this new Chat GPT thing was all about, and how it represents some opportunities and how it could be a threat. And over the following 5 or 6 weeks, she organized a series of workshops that helped us have a look at all of the aspects of what we're dealing with, not just the technology and the incredible opportunities behind ChatGPT, but also some things that schools should be thinking about in terms of how we're going to lead our students through the advent of these new technologies. Now, when Lauren first began this series, ChatGPT was very new. Everybody was coming back from the winter holiday or Christmas break, full of information, ideas, fears. I think over the past few weeks, some of the concern has settled down a little bit, and we've started the difficult task of figuring out now how are we really going to be doing this work with our students. How are we going to do this work with our staffs? How are we going to be bringing people on board? And so I asked Lauren if she wouldn't mind coming today to give us a little bit of an update of where she is now in her thinking and some of the things that she's learned about, at least in terms of what's going on in her neighborhood. And I'd like to ask her to do that within the context of the fact that in several weeks, she's going to be starting a new position with the Victoria's State Ministry of Education as someone in charge of curriculum. And I can imagine that this is going to be a huge question when it comes to curriculum. How are we going to be changing the way we teach? How are we going to change assessment and all of this? And so we'll be talking about all of this and more in the next 40 minutes or so. And with that, I'd like to welcome on board Lauren Sayer. Thank you for joining us, Lauren. How are you doing at midnight on a Friday morning? Oh, and we don't have your microphone. Let me bring you on. Can we try now?
Unmute. Okay.
There you go.
Good morning
All right.
from Australia. Thank you, Brett. I think it's been a great day here. Moving over into Friday morning, and I think what I'm hoping to do in the next 40 minutes, and it's a bit of a challenge, is take the series of 5 webinars that we did. I've sort of taken the best bits out, and I want to talk about what we learned along the way and where we're at now and what we're looking at. But I think I can tell you, Brett, that on the day 1 in January, after our summer holidays here in Melbourne, the big thing was nobody asked me. I had no one say, is ChatGPT or is AI blocked? I had a look today on our help desk, and there was a staff member who couldn't get onto ChatGPT. Now, it was a setting on her computer. It wasn't that we blocked it, but what it told me very quickly is our staff are using it and using it daily, because we're up to today was day 1 of our students back on site after our Easter break. And already our staff are going, oh, I can't use that yet. No, I would not have had that in January. So I think we're in an exciting time for our staff and our students.
Certainly is exciting. Unfortunately, with all of this great new technology surrounding us, you are freezing a little bit as you speak to us, but we hear you very clearly, so that's good. And maybe we'll go over to the slide where we have the introduction to your presentation. And I think we can begin just knowing that you are a little bit jumpy visually, but if we stick to the presentation, I think we'll get through this just fine.
No problems, Brett. Thank you. So I'm going to start today by really first acknowledging where I am. So myself and Melbourne Girls Grammar, we acknowledge and pay respects to our past, present and future traditional custodians of the land in which we're in. So I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people this evening, and I pay my respects to their elders and emerging elders. It's an ongoing cultural lesson that we're learning across Australia around our First Nations people, and I think it's important to start at that spot. We started this journey, and I think if you've never seen this, it's really worth being aware of, which is the Gartner hype cycle. And I think what we have is this at the moment, and we have a technology trigger, and that is AI, or I think at the start of the year it was ChatGPT, really. And all of a sudden, as it gets more visible, we get this peak of absolute inflated expectations. It's going to change absolutely everything, and it's going to be amazing. And then quickly we get into that area of disillusionment. And I think where we're at the moment in Australia is probably sitting somewhere on the slope of enlightenment. I don't think we're yet at the plateau of productivity. And the reason we're not is that this is changing so quickly. And I've got quite a few slides of the changes we've seen from January to April in terms of the apps, because I think that's very important in this space. I think one of the other things we've seen, and I think it's important to mention, is we've seen people's confidence change along this as well. And I think if anyone's ever seen the Dunning-Kruger effect of where we don't know much, we tend to think we're absolutely amazing at it. And I think when I first jumped on and started to ask questions, all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is amazing. But then I started to realize, oh, wait, it can give me really incorrect things that sound very impressive, and I'm a bit worried about that. And where we're at right now, I think, is the more I know, the more I don't know. And that's a very important place to be. I think every week someone new, and I'm so glad that Brett spoke about LinkedIn. I encourage you to jump on LinkedIn. Please add me and be part of this conversation, because it is global at the moment, and it hasn't been like this since, I think, Google. I've been in the digital education space for a long time, and we haven't seen the community of educators and learners across the world get together like this in a very, very long time. So what we've seen in 3 months is really important, because we've seen huge changes. And I'm going to make sure that my slides are available for Brett, but I think what I'm going to go through is quite quickly all of the changes, and then I want to talk about the impact and what we need to be ready for. But we've seen virtual assistants and chatbots. We saw GPT-3 become GPT-4 and become 3.5. We saw it get monetized, and I think that's an interesting thing where you can now pay for it. We've seen it go from a small model to a very large model. We've seen it move from these different areas so quickly. And we haven't had chances to see that. And with that, what we've seen is this amazing movement. And then we've started to see fear. You know, we're seeing people call it the mega threat of our economy and how to prepare now. And the 20 jobs most at risk. And I want to stop and just briefly mention that, because I think we think about this as teachers, but teaching is such an essentially human endeavour, where we know, I come from Melbourne, Victoria. We got the ominous record during COVID as being the most lockdown city in the world. We had I think, over 250 days in lockdown, where we were not allowed to leave our house. And we taught remotely, and we were so excited to get back into the classroom and get back with people. And our students were as well, because teaching is such a human endeavour. So I don't think a lot of our teachers started to get worried about jobs that were at risk. But what I'm seeing is our students are starting to worry about this. And this is becoming a little bit concerning for us, because I work at a girls' school, 130 years old, which is old for Australia, not that old for Europe, but and we're seeing a rise in our students being interested in very traditional vocations versus because they're looking at courses such as law and going, well, being a lawyer, that could be overtaken by AI, but maybe being a nurse is a very human position. And this has been an interesting thing, because I think for our students, there is a stability in knowing where we're going to go. And we've been running webinars on the future of work for our parents and our students. And it's a frightening prospect for our parents and our students that a young person may have 5 jobs all at once, and they'll be part of a gig economy, and they will be supported by other gig workers in that space. And our parents are getting very worried. They're going, oh, well, how will they do their tax? And we explain, well, somebody else in the gig economy will help with that. And it's been a really interesting situation of how we're working in this space, because I think all of a sudden it's becoming a more human thing. We're in that area of starting to go, well, what does this mean for us? Where our teachers are seeing a use straight away, and I think this is really interesting, is we're seeing this right now, is our teachers are using it daily, mainly to support wording and giving great personalised feedback on students. So being able to put in some key dot points and getting that into a comment statement that works in our reporting format is very important. Creating those lesson plans or sequences, even from an operational perspective of teacher wellbeing, looking at how we can separate and work out some of our duty in what we're doing on a day-to-day. Can you help me do this and put this in? And I think we're seeing this every day at our school now, and it is becoming part of our work with our teachers. Now, where are we seeing it with our students? I think one of the things that has happened in Australia is that a lot of jurisdictions have put a ban for students, and part of this is due to age restrictions and making sure that it sits with our privacy processes. And I would say another part is to make sure that we know what we're getting into and we've got good guidelines. And I'll talk about that as part of our media literacy space. We're starting to use it in our school around talking with some historical figures, going back in time and asking this in terms of this space. And where we're at now after this time is starting to look at what other types of AI are out there and how are they being used. So if I look at, this is just an overview of the progression in 4 months, where we went from GPT-3 to GPT-4. Now we're looking at things like Jasper, Grammarly, which I would say, if you asked our students across our school, what's the number one tool they use at school? Most of our students would say they use Grammarly. Now, Grammarly in January didn't have inbuilt AI. Grammarly in April has inbuilt AI. So where jurisdictions might ban one tool, what we're now seeing is other tools coming up. And I'll talk a bit about the Microsoft piece as well, because we've seen that as probably a big disruptor for us in this space. And we're now seeing that where we started with text, we've now got audio, video, and images, and we're using this as part of our practice. And that's been a big change for a lot of our staff. But with that, we're seeing new tools that come up. And So we're seeing things like Podcastle, which is an AI-generated podcasting tool. We're seeing VoiceMaker. We're seeing TTS MP3. I'm more putting these here as things for you to investigate, not to do a deep dive tonight. But if there's something that triggers your attention, you want to know more, send me a LinkedIn message. The first time I think Brett and I jumped on a call, our 15-minute call became over an hour call as we spoke. And it's really important to share right across the world. I learned more, I think, than Brett did in that conversation. In images, we're seeing DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and these are all apps that our students are starting to look at as well. But with this, we're having the discussion of, well, what is art? And is art part of the human experience? And what does AI art do? And what does it mean for copyright? And we're seeing that Australian lawmakers are looking at this as well, because they view copyright as something that is human-generated content. So this was in one of our news services today, and it was all about, well, who would own AI-generated content, and do I co-own it? Because the Australian government guidelines at the moment say no one owns it, because copyright is a human-generated tool. And we're starting to see things that sort of concern us as well. So and we're teaching our students about this, and this is a key one that we've used with our students. Of a nurse working in a hospital, please be realistic. What you might notice here and is they're all women. And I can tell you that I worked at the Royal Children's Hospital in a hospital school, and we had lots of male nurses who are amazing. But what we are starting to see, and I think it's okay at the moment because we're in this growth phase, is actually things like this allow us to have a conversation around what are the biases that are on the internet and what are the biases that AI might have, and how might we counter that? Because I think that's a really important place for us to be asking, because what we want our students to do is become critical users, not just consumers of technology. And I think that's our aim for our teachers and our students in this space. And in video, I think this is almost something that has scared our students of Synthasia and Flicky and video content, and the concept of, is the video I'm watching real? And what are the telltale signs of whether it's not or whether it is, but also what's the science behind it as well? And then we're starting to see some great tools that are starting to build on those first conversations. And I'll go through these again quite quickly, but what we have here is Tome, and Tome takes almost AI and generative chat GPT, and it takes it that step further. When I first jumped on ChatGPT and I asked it to give me some PowerPoint outlines, it would give me the dot points, and then I'd have to jump into PowerPoint and I'd have to build it myself and find my images. Tome puts together ChatGPT, image generators, and presentation software, and will put it all together for me. Now, this definitely saves time for teachers, but where does it free up time? I think it frees up time in making sure that the information is correct and it's fit for purpose. And I think this is the big opportunity for us at the moment, is freeing up some of the manual time and to be able to spend our time doing what we do best as teachers, which is be and create great critical thinkers in the world. Prompt perfect. And I think this is one that we're talking about with students in the future of world of work, which is, I don't think anyone knew 2 years ago, if I said a job in the future would be being a prompt engineer and creating great prompts for AI to create great content, they would have said, oh, wonderful, Lauren, you're dreaming again. But now we're seeing it. We're seeing the secret to creating great content using AI is being able to prompt. I would say that the IB sits really well in this space, where we know that one of the great ways to start anything is to ask critical questions and dig deeper. And I think that that concept is something that we're now looking at, where it's not just a couple of dot points, it's about actually putting it into something that would really support the students. And what we're now seeing is things like this. And I'd say this is one of my favorite learning tools right now, because not only does it optimize the prompt, it then actually speaks about, well, what has it done? So I think we've never had this. If you look at it, I think if you look at Google coming on, and, you know, my students are horrified when I tell them that I'm older than Google, and they say, you must be really old, miss. I teach year 9, so I teach 16-year-olds, but you must be really, really old. And I'm like, oh, I feel really old some days. But when Google first came out, there was a whole lot of work around how to create an amazing expanded advanced search. I think short of librarians, I don't think I could think of many students that could do an advanced Google search that would get them beyond the ads and through to the bits that they want. But that's because we've never had these sort of great tools that actually will create not just that great advanced search, but tell you what it's done. And I think one of the things that this is starting to do is democratize the internet. And we're starting to see that all of the information that was sitting with a small amount of people is now becoming there, I think. But the opportunity right now is to take it. And I think that's the exciting part in this space. Magic Studio, and again, this democratization, it used to take a very long time to edit photos. Now you can do it quite simply. What I would say is that would allow us to get back to some of the amazing things around what makes a wonderful photo in terms of rule of 3, different areas. And I think that's an important part, is where the technology is becoming less of a barrier to the learning. And that's a really important part, because I think I've worked in digital learning integration for most of my career, and the technology barrier for teachers has always been hard. It's been sitting next to teachers, holding their hands, supporting them through it. And now we're seeing that the guide on the side doesn't necessarily always have to be myself or a digital integrator. It can be somebody else in the form of AI. Formula generator. I will tell you, my Achilles heel in the technology world is Excel. I can't stand Excel. I've never really learned it well. I don't like it. What I am seeing is that, lo and behold, I've held on with my stubbornness long enough, more than a decade, and I'm starting to be able to get this. But what you now see is the bit that was always missing for me in Excel is this will help me generate the formula. More importantly, it will help me explain what it actually means. And I think that no one ever did that for me. I remember doing Excel courses as a teacher and through my career, and no one ever explained it. They'd be like, put in B2 plus C3 equals, and we never got any further. And what we're now seeing is not only does it give you the answer, but it explains it. And I think that this is where we need to be in technology. And now what we're seeing, and this is sort of starting to blow in the wind of any bans that have happened across Australia, is Copilot. And this is AI in Microsoft. And what you will see here is it's working within Word. As most of our schools in Australia either use Google or Microsoft, both of them have AI embedded now. What we are seeing very, very quickly is we can't ban this, because it's in every piece of approved software that's sitting on a school's list. So we're seeing it in Word, we're seeing it in Excel, where Copilot will go, what can I do for you? What can I do for you today? And it will start to do it for me. What I've always wanted. Usually I've asked an expert in this space, but what I'm seeing is I can still ask that expert, but I might get them to help me with something else. And I think that's the important thing. And then in PowerPoint, as we've got today, I promise you I did not use this for today, but I can get it to create this for me and work it out. And then what I think is probably the best time saver in this space is Copilot in email, of actually being able to word emails in a very quick, succinct way and appropriately. But our ability to be able to do these things is just going to be embedded in this new way of working we're seeing straight away. But with that comes responsibility. So I've sort of taken you in a whirlwind tour in 20 minutes of what we've learned and where we've come to between January and April. I now want to talk about, well, what does that mean for us as teachers? And I think media literacy is going to be an important area that we all need to focus on, because media literacy incorporates all of the artistic and technological outputs of individuals, groups, collectives around the world, and it's not restricted to one media. And I'll talk about this in a minute. But really what we're starting to look at, I think, is sitting at the fundamental of the IB. And I hope, because what we're talking about here is applying critical thinking to digital and non-digital media. And this critical thinking can take place whether you are creating media, sharing it, or consuming it. And how do you apply this to critical thinking? By analysing the media, by evaluating it, and by reflecting all the time when you are engaging or creating. And I think that that's an interesting thing, where I think of the term that gets bandied around a little bit of lifelong literacy. But lifelong, in terms of anything, is so important. And we need to be able to look at this as literacy used to be this thing of, if I can read, that will support me right through my life. I think media literacy, we have to look at this, because any form of media, whether it's print, video, digital, we need this as a lifelong skill. And I get a few people say, I'm not into video, or I'm not into this. And I don't think we have to be on, I don't think we all have to suddenly jump onto TikTok and use TikTok or different mediums like that. But we do need to have an understanding so that we can critically engage. And that's a really important thing. And I think that media literacy requires us to think critically about how media works, how it's represented in our world, and how are they produced and used. And that's by David Buckingham. That's not my words, they're his, but I will make sure those links are there. Because really what we're starting to look at is, we're looking at a national approach across Australia in terms of this. And what we're wanting people to do is, we want them to be able to understand what they're doing, make informed decisions, and evaluate all forms of media. Now, when I went to school, that was the newspaper at the kitchen table. Now it's a very, very different space. And I think that it's not something that we need. I'm not suggesting that media or media literacy be an add-on to what you're already doing, but I do feel that there's an urgent and real need for the profession to be engaged in this media literacy, to understand for yourself how information's created, accessed, and distributed. More importantly, though, I think it's us as teachers and schools who have such an important role, because we're that role model for students on what it is to be an active, empowered citizen. And media literacy sits in this sort of nest, and I think that this is important. You've got to be really aware, and I know there's many literacies out there in the world, but I said before, media literacy is that ability to critically engage with all forms. Now, this is a bit different to information literacy, which used to be what our librarians looked at, which was the ability to find, evaluate, organise, use, and communicate information. Or digital literacy, which is our ability to find, evaluate, and communicate information on a digital platform. We've got our online safety, but media literacy complements all of these, because all of these areas are required for us to be successful and safe in a digital world. At the centre of all of these, what I would argue tonight or this morning is that critical thinking is the common thread. And it's this kind of thinking in which you always question, analyse, interpret, evaluate, and make a judgment about whatever you read, hear, see, say, or write. And I think that that's where we're coming to in this space. And this is where our teaching's beginning to go, because it's so important for us to start to have these conversations with our students. What I'm going to talk about here is what I would suggest is a framework. Now, this framework is through a group called the Australian Media Literacy Alliance. So for us, I think this is something that we can start to use, but I think it shouldn't just be used by schools, but the reality is that society look to us as being those people. And I think these areas are incredibly important. And you'll see there are 10 competencies that sit, but they sit under these 4 areas of being able to reflect, understand, use, and then achieve, and what we can achieve. Because this has to be adaptable, and we need to be able to make it age appropriate as well in this space. In this, I think one of the important bits that I want to make at this stage is that this is not new. What I've got up here are some old articles from 2006, 2010 around should we ban Wikipedia? And I don't know, I'm not too sure of the age of our audience, but I definitely remember this as a teacher of should we ban Wikipedia? Now, and it was in the papers, and we were looking at all of this, and people started to say, well, no, we need to teach information literacy instead. I think what ended up happening was Wikipedia got big enough that you couldn't ban it. I would argue that we never got to the point where we effectively taught information literacy or media literacy in this space. And I feel like I'm almost going back in time with the same message, but we have to be able to do this, because now Wikipedia gets changed very quickly by people, so it is quite reliable. You know, there's been a bit of work around it can be more reliable than some static resources that you might have because of how quickly. ChatGPT and AI won't always give you their references. So media literacy and information literacy in this space will be a lot more critical than it was with Wikipedia, because Wikipedia, we knew what was good and we knew where the sources were. So I think that it's time for us to rethink plagiarism and cheating. And I wanted to put this up, and it's a great website in this, but I think we need to rethink what this is, because are we looking at it in terms of cheating? Which of these are then relevant to our students' futures? And I'd like you all to ask yourself, which of these would you use in your work as an adult? Because I think what we started to see between January and April was our teachers were like, I'm very worried about plagiarism, but I'm okay with using ChatGPT to create the questions. There's a bit of a dissonance there, where I think as we've started to have these conversations, we're seeing a difference again. We're seeing, okay, we need to rethink this and look at it, because we can start to see that this is going to change the way we're asking questions. And I think that that's an important bit. And what we're saying to our students is, remember, trust things, but always verify, no matter who it's from. And we see this with media literacy of, we hear students say, oh, well, I believe it from that newspaper or that news source, but I don't believe it from that news source. And when we ask why, it's quite interesting, the power of conversation of adults. And there was a whole lot of research in Australia of how this is being done, but our young people trust their teachers and their parents. So we need to be, words have power. And I think what we're making sure is when students ask us for a truth in our education, we're encouraging them not to necessarily always take it just from us, because we want them to trust but verify. And that's so important. And I think that this bit is really key. And I think these are the key questions when we're asking about verifying. So with generative AI, who made the media and why did they make it? We need to think about the audience. So who was this media made for and how are they likely to respond to it? We need to look at the representations of, and this is where we look at that nurse image that I had before of how are people, places, or ideas portrayed in this media, and what are the impacts of this? I think the next bit is really important and something, and when Brett spoke to me about well-being in the age of AI, asking what relationships are being developed through the distribution and the use of this media. So I can talk about LinkedIn right now and talk about how I've made some amazing relationships through my distribution of content and use of that media form. I could talk about how I've got some students that have been bullied on Instagram and the effect that that's had on their relationships. There's a flip of the coin, but how many times do we actually critically look at what relationships are being developed through the distribution and use of this media, whether it's ChatGPT or any other media? And then I think this bit here is something of what was the technology that was used to produce, access, and then circulate it? Does the technology gather personal data from users? Europe's a lot further ahead than we are in Australia in terms of GDPR and privacy, but I suppose their government down. What I would like to see is our students and our teachers asking those questions themselves. What I can say of our young people, and I'd be keen to know from over in Europe as well, is we're seeing a group of students now that don't want to be on social media, that deliberately ask not to be part of photos posted on, and they say, I do not have a TikTok, an Instagram, a Facebook. I have none of this. I don't want an online curated image in that space. I choose not to. I think it's a really interesting space where we're seeing young people, and I would question, is it because we haven't done this well? Is it this all or nothing? Because they can't find the balance. So either I do it all and or I don't do it at all. And looking at the language of media. So how does this communicate using image, sound, and written text? And I think if you've got a film studies teacher or a media teacher as far as traditional media out there, incredibly key to start to look at how this is so important in this space, because I think we've got to ask these questions and we've got to look at these bits as well. And these are some of the things that we're starting to look at. And I'll give these links because I think the ethics is important. And we're starting to look at these key questions because you can I've seen manifestos of ethics and AI, and there are so many and there are pages and pages, but I suppose I've worked as a director of technology and I know where acceptable use policies are filed and never seen again. So for us at the moment, four key questions that we're looking at in the ethical space. It's, when you are using this, are you disclosing the authorship and are you fact checking it before you're producing it? Are you considering the potential bias and how are you going to account for that bias? And it could be through using a different prompt, but how are you going to do that? And these are questions we want all learners, whether they're students or teachers, to ask. When is it ethical to use video of people without their consent? This is something that we look at. We see it on the news all the time of public places and videos, and I think it's something our students grapple with, of they may choose not to be on the internet, but what if someone else puts me up? And then what credit and compensation is due when other people's work's being used to train it? And does this pose a threat to artists and designers? And this was in the papers today in Australia. But what it's saying is that humans have copyright, AI does not. So this is a really interesting space. I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions, but what I want to look at here is two quotes that I think I keep going back to. We all know that a chatbot is not enough. And whilst fact and knowledge is great, wisdom and experience is so much better. Wisdom and deep understanding should be our goal. So I'm going to return right back to, I think, a question that came up when Google first came out. And that was, if you can Google the answer to the question on a test, is that question the best one in the first place? Now, I want you to think about that in the concept of AI or writing the essay or doing something like this. If AI can write the essay, are we having students make their own connections, creating a deep understanding, or are they giving answers that might lack humanness in their response? Our negatives in all of this can be turned into an opportunity when we revisit what we ask of students and how they share a deep understanding of what they learned. What I am hoping is that this next bit is true. And George Couros has been an educational hero of mine in the US for a very long time. This is from 2014. It's not new. The quote doesn't change. Technology will never replace us as great teachers, but if you put it in the hands of a great teacher, it can be absolutely transformational. And with that transformation, I think that we've got that opportunity as long as we are looking for great understandings. And what we're at now is looking at how can we save time on some of the automated areas, but how can we spend more time on the deep understanding? I'm moving forward to questions now. Brett, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We do have some questions lined up here. And the first question is of great interest to me as well, again, as a school leader. And the question is, does your school hold sessions specifically for your students to navigate all of these new programs? And I might add to that question with the parents. I know that your school has taken some steps to introduce this new technology, not only to teachers, but to students and parents. Could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yes. So we've got a digital literacy or digital citizenship and scope and sequence. One of the roles that sit in our school is a director of digital learning, and he has a low teaching allocation. He teaches two classes, which is quite small in that way. The rest of the time he spends working with students and teachers to build their digital literacy and running workshops. So he runs digital boot camps for our students. And that is whether we're using a new app or they're getting a new device, and the same for our teachers. And being able to run what we call, and a very Australian term, we call them techie brekkies. So brekkie is the short, in Australia we love to shorten nearly every word, but brekkie is breakfast. So Craig will run a techie brekkie of a morning and offer free breakfast and a short micro learning session around a different area for either students or for teachers. And what we have been doing is bringing our parents along for this as well. We've run parent sessions, and we're not stopping with that because our parents are afraid of this area. So our first session was around the future in the world of work, and then we've done a session for our parents. We also invited our parents to our teacher webinars that we ran. We ran a 5-series ABC Chat GPT in that space. If parents wanted to come, if people from our community wanted to come and see what was happening in the educational conversation, they were welcome to. And I think that was a really important thing as well, Brett, was we're trying to demystify what we're doing. And I think we have no choice but to do this now. You know, being locked down in Victoria for as long as we were, we had parents in our classrooms for over 200 days watching us practice. That means we can't close those doors now. They're open.
Yeah, very, very good point. I love the idea of techie brekkies. I wrote that down, but then I noticed when I made the word brekkie and I spelled it as if it stopped with breakfast or it was an abbreviation of breakfast, it actually reads techie breaky. We'll go careful with those techie breakfasts up here in Europe. The next question is concerning art. What are your thoughts on using Magic Studio for IBDP visual arts?
I think where it sits is if it's attributed, and this is where it is, because we have to look at what is the skill that we are assessing on. Are we assessing on photo editing, or are we assessing on composition? Because I think what we've seen in many schools previously to these sorts of things like Magic Studio was almost an arms race of the best portfolios were made by the students who had access to the best technicians or the best support somewhere else. So I think what I hope happens is that we get a better quality of attribution and that it becomes a bit more of a level playing field in this space, because I think we used to see almost the haves and have-nots of schools, where if a school had an amazing technician they could get that would support the students in the classroom, there was a different level. Now, that guide on the side, whether it be a person or a bot, I don't think it's different. I think the difference is that both of them we need to attribute.
I think this is a recurring theme for us throughout the week as well, and that is what's new is old and what's old is new again. I mean, we have been through this process many times. I remember at one of the first presentations that you organized, we were talking about how, what an outrage or what a challenge, what a danger it was when Texas Instrument calculators were allowed to be used for IB exams, and that would, kids would stop learning math. And again, it takes us a little bit of time to come around and really work with this technology. We have one more, last question for today, and it's about Copilot. The person is writing, Copilot seems great. I wonder, though, how can we use Copilot in a way that would avoid the potential pitfall of skipping the knowing and understanding in order to fast-track the creating of content? In other words, can I be sure I understand the formulas Copilot is creating for me if I couldn't come up with those formulas in the first place?
I think this is where we will start to see the explanations, and I think this is a really important part of it, is with Copilot, it's great, but where I see the ability for this is that as a teacher, Copilot might help me do that, but then actually asking, whether it be ChatGPT or whether it might be Cortana in Microsoft, so to speak, of can you explain to me what it has done? And I think that is key and important of it is there. And then backwards mapping that to the skills. I think there's a lot of, if you, whilst I work in technology, I'm originally a physical education and health teacher. When we teach a sporting skill, we see it all in motion before we do it, and then we break it back. And I think what we're starting to see in this space is a bit of that with Copilot, whereas we can see the end product. And then I think the opportunity for us as teachers is to then backwards map the learning. And as a physical education teacher, that comes quite naturally to me, because I think, I remember teaching swimming and showing a full stroke and what freestyle looks like in order to then break it down into its parts. And I think if you've got a PE teacher near you, ask them about this, because I think they've got an amazing amount of learning, because this, exactly what you said, Brett, what is old is new again in this space is all we're doing is showing the end product, but it's us as teachers to then backward map it to the learning to make it really critical in that space so that we don't lose it. I think there is a concern of skimming over. I'm not going to say there isn't, but we hold the culture and the learning in schools, not anybody else. It's us. So I think that that's key.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Last question is coming from me. Excuse me. And it's about you've gathered a lot of information over the past 4 months or so. You're coming out of your current position as someone who's had, at least partially, to figure out what we're going to do with this AI stuff. And now you're off to the Ministry of Education. You're going to be focusing on curriculum there. What do you expect you'll bring with you? And what do you expect that you will expect then from schools in Victoria as they try to address this? Easy question.
I think just a small one. I think what we're looking at as a state and as a nation in Australia, there is already a national task force of all the states of how do we modernise our assessment practices in light of this. And I think the learning I have, and I think there's so many learnings in the IB in this space of actually assessing for understanding, not necessarily for knowledge and facts. And I think what we will see is that change, because I've been doing an adult learning course recently. My exam was fully open book. If I wanted to use ChatGPT, I could, but I had to provide a context. And I think that that's what we want for our students. And I think our universities are asking this as well. And I think from a curriculum perspective, what we're looking for is being able to make sure that we have a high quality, low variance curriculum. And I think that AI might help that, because I think the amount of time teachers spend taking the curriculum to the lesson, to the classroom, is huge. And anything that any department can do to support that has to be a positive, because I think we've got these hours with our students every day. That's the hours that should matter. But I think sometimes the bits that matter is the curriculum document there. I think as a department, we can help with that. And that's my aspiration in that space anyway, before starting.
Well, we wish you good luck with that. I think we're all coming to realize as schools around the world, we do have to take a good look at our curriculum and the expectations we have from the kids and how we're going to do this assessment. And it's good to know that there will be someone like you at the ministry level who understands and gets this. So Lauren Sayer, currently Executive Director of Learning and Research at the Melbourne Girls Grammar Institute, and future member of the Victoria Ministry of Education. Thank you very much for spending time with us today, sharing the experiences that you've had as a director at your school and addressing the overall issues of what's out there. It's really been a pleasure to have you. Thank you for staying up so late to be with us, and I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future. This is not something that's just going to end tomorrow with solutions achieved. I guess this is going to be an ongoing and never-ending process.
Yes, it is. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. I can tell you that the future is wonderful here. So we're in Friday and it's fantastic. Okay. Have a lovely day.
Great. So Lauren Sayer, thank you again very much for joining us. Be well, and we'll slowly get ready for the last of our sessions today. In just a few moments, we'll be joined by John Patton from St. Gilgen's School in Austria. And I'm hoping that he will join us quickly through eCam. John, if you're out there, it's time to join us. In the meantime, we'll play a little video of some of the presentations that we've seen so far, at least of the speakers that have been here with us. Thank you again, Lauren. All right, everybody, welcome back to our ACES annual general meeting. This is the third session of today's third day, and I'm very, very happy that in just a moment we'll be joined by John Patton from the International School, St. Gilgen's International School in Austria, and he's going to be sharing something that I think is all on our minds right now, especially those of us who are in close relationship to graduating DP students, and that is well-being in the diploma program. And I guess without any further ado, I'll just get John in. He's an experienced DP coordinator, a university counselor. So not only does he get the joy of helping kids get through the diploma examinations, but he's been trying to guide them on their course after the DP as well. So, and I know that St. Gilgen's does a great job getting kids into great universities. So I can imagine that there's a fair amount of pressure on you as well.
Every so once in a while, but thanks so much, Brett. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks to everybody for sticking around. Hopefully it's going to be a great session. I was going to say you must have just saved the best for last, but after looking at some of the presentations that have happened, I think I've got a high bar to clear here. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today.
You're very welcome, and past experience has shown that we may have indeed saved the best for last. So with that, I'll move to this screen, and let's get through this.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Brett. And again, thanks everybody for joining me today. Whether you're a diploma program teacher or if you're a coordinator, a school leader, if you're just involved in education with young people, hopefully there's going to be something useful for you here today. As Brett mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about student well-being and the IB diploma program. And my manifesto, my whole goal whenever I go through all this is basically that the IB diploma program is not actually what most people say. Oh, it's so stressful, it's overwhelming, I can't do it. But actually, the IB diploma program is meaningful, it's achievable, and it's enjoyable. And I want to take you through a few things today that help us, work toward that. I wouldn't say we've accomplished that in any, that we're 100% at that, but it's practice, right? Just as anything in education. So we're practicing these things, and these are some things that help us quite a bit, and I hope they help you as well. I'm going to be drawing quite a bit of information from this book here. This is written by David Didow, and it's basically what every teacher needs to know about psychology. I recommend it highly. There's a few other books that I'm going to be using in today's presentation, but that one is definitely one that you can be checking out as well. So let's dive in and let's start talking about, student well-being and the IB diploma program in general. We've got 4 main points that I'm going to be going through today. First one has to do with just what is anxiety, what is stress in the IB diploma program specifically? What are those events and those things that really cause stress in our young people? Then we're going to get into this idea of how stimulation can lead to performance and good performance, but when we overstimulate, we can lead into stress. And we're going to unpack stress, what I would actually identify as just as bad of a word as the F word or the S word. When we start using stress, then that's actually not so great. So we're going to look at ways in which we get there and how do we define it and what can we do about it. And that's the part that I hope everybody finds something useful. I'm going to go over some actionable approaches to improving student well-being and reducing that anxiety, stuff that you can start implementing immediately in what you're doing right away. As we've got diploma program students in exams starting even today, some might have gotten going today. Ours start on Monday. And then basically going to be getting into some key things that you can do to make sure that that diploma program experience for the young people is meaningful and enjoyable. So let's dive in, and we'll first get started with just a question out to you. Have you or someone you know felt stress or anxiety during the IB diploma program? And how did you handle that situation? Now, you might be, calm as can be, no big issues, this is simple. So maybe you don't experience any stress on the IB diploma program. That's great. You can answer no. How is it that you are able to achieve that? So give us just a moment here. Write your comments into the chat, please. Have you or someone you know felt stress or anxiety during the IBDP, and how did you handle the situation? I'll give you a moment.
And maybe while we have some comments and some shared experiences here, I'm having the opportunity as a stepfather to witness the joys of stress and the build-up to getting everything completed on time, IAs and the extended essay, making sure that the CAS project early in the year was complete on time and everything. And I think one of the main stress points for kids in the DP is the time organization. The work just seems to pile up and build up so quickly. So that's my take on it. We still don't have any comments in the comment box. Guys, please feel free to reach out. We'd like to try to make this as interactive as possible. And as you can see, John is a very friendly person. He doesn't bite. So please feel free to reach out.
Well, I do hear some comments, but I mean, if they're back, I got to get at it. No, I totally agree. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about with regard to time management and making sure that we're as prepped as we can be.
Yeah, the first few comments that I see now, first one is about they feel the stress and pressure over time management. And another comment that our students this year are experiencing a lot of stress and pressure from their parents.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, excellent comments. I appreciate that. I'm following along here as well, so I can see Paul. I really appreciate that comment. Thanks for bringing that in there. Seeing that one from Aaron as well. I totally agree with you. Parental pressure is a key thing that comes in. And I can tell you in my experience as university and careers guidance counselor, that pressure can be overwhelming in some cases. And the number of times I've had students in this office with tears running down their face because they feel like they're letting people down, that's a huge, huge factor. So very well identified there, Aaron. I appreciate that. Yeah, Andrew. Yeah, stress for all students, helping them by having clear deadlines, supporting them, stick to them. Yeah, I agree. That's how we can handle that. It's one point I'm going to be commenting on here as well. And Ursula, I really appreciate your comment as well here. Yeah, that sort of dual route, when you've got to do two things at once, the Austrian Matura and the IB Diploma program, that's quite a bit. And when you're meeting both of those, I imagine that stress is not just on the student, that's coming on teachers as well. So excellent. Thanks for getting involved. I appreciate that. Just want to kind of see how we're doing. So let's dive into some of the key things here because you've identified them correctly right away. There's a few really important things that cause anxiety and stress in the IB Diploma program. And the first and foremost one, it's demanding and it is rigorous. I mean, there's a reason that the IB Diploma program is understood worldwide. There's a reason that it can be accepted at universities across the globe. And there's a reason that it holds the prestige that it does. It's a challenging thing that we're putting people through. It's demanding. It is rigorous. It's got a lot to it. It is more than most typical, pre-university degrees. On top of that, that results in a high workload. Of course, that's going to mean that our students have a lot to do. It means that as teachers, we've got a lot to cover in a little amount of time, and we got to make sure that students understand key things. And I know I'm preaching to the choir right now of people who work in international schools where we have students who come to us with multiple different language backgrounds, multiple different backgrounds in terms of how they've learned over their time. And now we've got to work with that as well. So there is added pressures here. Not to mention that sort of feeling of lack of time and just the general sense of lack of time. As diploma program coordinator, I'm constantly working with our teams here, looking at how much time are we dedicating to classes on a daily basis, and are we actually meeting that even just that minimum mark with all the holidays that can come in, with sort of days off and things like that just sort of get in the way, actually. And suddenly you realize, wow, I'm going to go about a week and a half and not actually seeing my students, and I'm going to miss some serious stuff here. So that can be something that can really add in quite a bit of stress. Even just the idea of a deadline, something it's live for a while, but after this day, it's dead, it's done. That you got this day, and that's where the pressure is up. You've got an extended essay, and it's due on this day. You've got an IA, and this is when it's due. For many students, this is actually the first time that they're experiencing that type of pressure on an assignment. And so that's going to bring up quite a bit of stress and anxiety for them as well. The high expectations, Aaron, you hit it right on the head with your comment there with regard to what parents are expecting, and even just the expectations they can place on themselves. I mean, sometimes I've had students in here where the parents are super supportive, they're really kind, and they're just saying, we want you to do what's best for you, take care of yourself. but the student has their own expectations that are so high, and in some cases almost unachievably high, and that can really make them crumble. So those expectations, and sometimes the expectations that we place on them as well, and there leads into more pressure, feeling like they've got to perform better, feeling like they've got all these things, these big decisions they have to make as well. And ultimately, all this comes down to a fear of the unknown. What's coming up, and how big of an impact is that going to have on my life? As DP coordinator and University and Careers Guidance Counselor, I was just meeting with a student 2 days ago who completely fell apart because she was feeling the pressure of trying to choose which university to go to. She had a deadline coming up within a week for one university. Her main university she wanted to go to wouldn't be accepting her decision for another 3 weeks, but she didn't know how she was going to perform on the exams, and she knew that mattered in terms of if she could get an offer from the other university. So this whole, I don't know what's going to happen, can add a ton of stress as well, and a ton of anxiety in the diploma program. So here's sort of the backdrop. This is setting the scene. This is what we got to work with, and this is what we've got in front of us. And I know I'm just sort of identifying a few things. In fact, I invite you, throw it in the chat as well. What are some other things that you notice are causing stress and anxiety in the diploma program? Because I know I haven't hit it all, but this is just some of the key stressors that our students are facing and that we're facing as well. Now, I mentioned earlier that stress to me is kind of like a 4-letter word. You know, it's a dangerous word to be using, actually. And what I've noticed is it's a common word. We use it a lot. Our students use it a lot. And sometimes stress can be a really good thing. I mean, let's not forget about the positive impact it can have. I'm showing the Yerkes-Dodson law bell curve, which is pretty common within psychology and education. Basically, the idea that there's an optimum amount of arousal that will lead to optimum performance. And that happens when we do have a certain amount of pressure. I always laugh about it, where I'll talk with students and they're like, well, Mr. Patton, I work really well under pressure. And I'm like, maybe we could just adjust that sentence. You work under pressure. Whether or not you do that really well, that could be debated a bit. But you can see where if our arousal is really low, if the pressure is really low, we tend to perform pretty low. And I think we've all been there, where if we don't have massive deadlines, if we don't have something that's pressing immediately, we kind of chill out a little bit. We might relax and we think, oh, I don't have to do so much. And therefore, the performance on those specific tasks might be a little bit lower. When that arousal comes up a little bit higher, oh, I've got a deadline coming up, or this is starting to get more important, that's when that sort of optimal arousal and that optimal performance can hit that place as well. But of course, too much arousal, too much stimulation, too much stuff can start to lead to a decrease in performance as well. So we're really trying to find where's that optimal arousal and that optimal performance, and how can we make sure that we as teachers, but also our students on the diploma program, can be sitting right there at the peak of that bell curve and making sure that they are giving us their very best, and we are structuring things so that they can give the very best. And ultimately, this comes down to effectively many categories, but David Didau, again, this guy here, organizes this down into 3 main areas. First, it comes down to self-efficacy. This is the belief in oneself that I am capable of doing the things that I'm being asked to do, right? The challenge is in front of me, I can do it. The only way I know that is if I've had some sort of previous exposure to similar challenges, and that I've got some sort of control over the problem. So my level of self-efficacy gives me the capability to be able to tackle the challenge. The second thing he talks about is social support. So are there others around me that are going through the same thing? And do I have that support of them too? Do I have other people that are empathizing with me that are going through the same thing as well? And that can be family, just sort of understanding the situation. You know, Brett, I really appreciated what you mentioned there at the start. You know, you've got your I think you said your stepchild, right? You've got somebody in your family who's going through this now as well. And just to know that there's somebody who understands that context, that you've got friends that are going through the same thing, or maybe you've got role models who maybe aren't going through the exact same thing in the diploma program, but you see them handle stressful situations as well. Those sort of things, those shared experiences, help to build a social support. And that social support really helps to keep kids in that optimal arousal and that optimal performance. And the third thing that comes to mind here is being aware of accumulation and amplification. So what I mean by this is we might experience one super stressful, highly aroused sort of area that might decrease our performance, but we can easily dismiss one of those, right? Or if we're able to focus on that one thing at one time, that's fine. But it's when a few of them accumulate and they come in at once that suddenly that starts to combine all these different stress events, and we start to feel overwhelmed, and our performance really starts to drop as well. So when we are able to work with these three things, we're able to essentially get our students right here in this optimal arousal and optimal performance. So let's unpack these in a little bit more detail. Starting with self-efficacy. And I want to talk about practical strategies that you can do to build self-efficacy. Now, I've got a photo here. This is our head of school over here, and she's congratulating one of our students who last year was in 7th grade. And right away, I just want you to notice in the background a few things that you see here. One, this is obviously a performance stage. You can imagine that this is in front of the whole school. But notice there's congratulations going on here, and obviously there's a certificate. There's something that's going on. And the reason I bring this up is because first and foremost, we've got to bring in multiple achievable successes. So what helps to build self-efficacy is if that person has had multiple achievable successes in the past to those things that are whatever they're experiencing. So they've got to have the chance of trying something and succeeding at it. And when we have multiple of those experiences, that builds their own self-efficacy, that belief that I can do this. Actually, I'm not scared of it. I've done it before. I've succeeded before. I can do it. Now, with that, whenever you're creating possibilities for success, you are inherently creating possibilities for failure. Now, it's really important that you create opportunities for safe failure. It is so important that students fail a few times. They have to. I'm a mountaineer, I'm a climber, and I always liken this to being on lead on climbing. Now, if you don't know climbing too well, leading is basically where you're the first person to go up the rock. You have the rope attached to you and it goes down to the person who's belaying you, but you're not safe until you put that rope into an anchor point above you, and then you climb up a little bit more. If you fall, you're safe by that anchor point. It means that every single time that you're above that anchor point, there's a chance that you could fail. There's a chance that you could fall, right? Now, what's interesting about this, when you're a climber, if you go a long time without falling, that starts to build up in your head a lot more about, oh, this is going to be really terrible. If I fall, I'm above my last anchor point. Oh, that whip's going to really hurt. I'm going to fall. Oh, it blows up. It magnifies so much worse than it needs to be. But as soon as you actually do it, as soon as you fall from above the anchor and you realize, actually, this is as bad as it gets. Okay, I'm okay. I'm okay. I can keep climbing. I'm still fine. Now, that metaphor, I want to throw that back here into the educational setting. When you've got those safe failures, those opportunities to make a mistake, to fall back a little bit, it helps you realize how bad things are, how bad things can get. And that's super important because otherwise, one of the biggest things with stress is this over-amplification of how bad the thing is. We need to bring that back into check. And to do that, you've got to have multiple achievable successes and multiple opportunities for failures. In the whole process, we've got to be encouraging growth over performance. Our main speaker from last night, who visited us from Australia and was telling us all sorts of stuff, Mr. McCormick, one of the key things he brought in was encourage growth. It's less about points, it's less about marks, it's less about the A's and the 1s through the 7s and all that sort of stuff. It's about getting better each day. And if we bring that focus back on that, again, it builds that self-efficacy, helps that young person understand that I am capable, I can do this. The other part of this is accepting challenges, making sure that we are using the right words when we say this. Yes, this is going to be a challenge. What you've got in front of you, this is going to ask something from you. It's going to ask more from you than what you think you can do. You ready for that? That's okay. That terminology is really good, and it helps to frame it for that young person as well. Because otherwise, if all they hear is, boy, this is going to add a lot to your plate, you got to manage it, almost from a I'm sorry that I'm adding to your plate, that's not the way to build self-efficacy. On the flip side, we're bringing this up saying, look, you're about to take on something, and I know you can do it. You ready for this challenge? That sort of change in vocabulary, the change in the way we present it, makes a big difference to how these students can actually grow from that. And that brings me to this idea of choice in our vocabulary. How we talk about the diploma program makes a big difference. If we open this thing up with, well, this is going to be The diploma program is super challenging. Not a lot of people pass it. It's only got about a 78% pass rate off of last year. And, this is going to be tough. You can expect somebody who's going to fail and that sort of thing. But you got to manage it, or it's just another step to get to the next phase. You just got to get through it. That sort of vocabulary, framing it that way for a young person, already primes them to feel like they're out of control. Shift the way that we talk about this, right? We got to shift this. The diploma program is going to be meaningful. You're going to achieve it because you can, right? And on top of that, you're going to find this thing to be really enjoyable. You're going to learn new things. It's going to be really cool. Yes, you will experience challenges. Yes, you will be stretched beyond what you've done before. And that's going to be awesome for you. It's going to be so good. People have done it. I've seen them do it. I can do it. You can do it. Big difference in the way that we start talking about that. And it's a big difference in terms of that mentality, in terms of how students handle it. So this brings me to this idea that actually Didal and Rose comment on in their book. And I'll give you just a moment to read this. So let's pause for a moment, have a read. Now I want to let that sink in, because again, this comes down to our vocabulary. It's how we choose to speak about challenging events. It's how we choose to speak about the diploma program, and it's how we choose to speak about the unknowns, that university acceptance letter, that earning your offer based off of the points that you're going to earn, all that sort of stuff. We have to be careful here that when we start talking about experiences that young people are going through, that we're not immediately pathologizing them. In other words, turning them into some sort of illness or some sort of thing that they have to now deal with. I'm not saying that focusing on well-being in schools is a bad thing, by no means. But I am saying that when we focus on well-being within schools, we need to be careful of the way that we speak about it. We cannot talk about stress as if it's the worst thing that somebody's going to experience. The stress you're going to experience in this program will be good for you. That's an important thing. That's an important message to say. Because sometimes what we can end up doing is we can talk about stress as if it's the worst thing they're going to experience. We can talk about how challenging this is going to be, and then suddenly they're not going to be able to cope with it. They're going to have to find other methods, right, to make things work. And when we start talking about these other things, we can inadvertently exacerbate feelings of emotional vulnerability and lead to this idea of diminished self. If all the adults around you are telling you how challenging it's going to be and how impossible it is, how does that make you feel about your ability to do it? We have to be really focused on how we're choosing the words we talk about so that we don't end up making this person feel like they have a diminished sense of their ability, but rather that they can. All that comes down to this idea of that self-efficacy. The more we can build their belief that they can do it, the better things are going to be. But it doesn't just come down to self-efficacy. It's also focused on that social support. And you might think, well, this depends a lot on, the student and their friendship groups and their family, and so many things are out of my control. What sort of parental influence is there? All these things might feel out of control. But I'm telling you right here, there are ways in which you can build and enhance social support so that young people feel like they're not alone and they feel like they can go through it together. And the easiest one is right here in this photo. This is an event that we have at the school. It's our Achievements in STEM evening, or Achievements in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Maths. Basically what we do is once students have completed their science IAs and their maths IAs, we put them on display. We put them up in this gallery area and we show it to the whole school so that anybody can come, whether you're in 7th grade or all the way up in 12th grade. You look at what the students have done. But beyond that, we take copies of their IAs or their practice IAs from previous years. So when they first joined the school in 7th grade, they might have done a science experiment and they wrote up about it. We'll put that on display right next to what they've done as well. It celebrates their achievements. It shows how much they've grown. But on top of that, it shares expectations with everybody else. The young students that come into that area as well, and they start looking, now they've got a good idea. Oh, this is what I'm working toward. This is the end goal. Here's what I need to create. And they talk with people and they talk with the grade 12s and they learn about their successes and their failures and they empathize with them. And by doing so, they realize, I can do that too. They did it. I can do this. Because there's a common aim. You've made it very clear. And with that, you build social momentum. We've been doing this Achievements in Science 7 years, 8 years at the school now. And this builds such a buzz around students understanding what is the IA? What is, in this case, the science IA or the maths IA? What do I have to do? And can I actually achieve that? Some students walk away with an initial shock. They might be in grade 11, they might be in grade 10. They're like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Did you see that? It was like 3,500 words, in this thing. It was a full experiment. I don't think I can do that. But at least they're getting that initial shock early on in a safe place with other people who can empathize with them, who can be there with them, and they've got that social support. Now they know what the bar is and they can start to work toward it. So create events. It's an excellent way to enhance social support. A second super achievable thing, again, comes down to choosing our language carefully. So when we are empathizing, and we do need to do that, students are going to come to you, they're going to feel stressed. Students are going to come to you, they've got tears in their eyes because they're not meeting the expectations of themselves or the parents, or whatever it is. It is super important that we empathize, obviously. Let's understand them. Let's put ourselves in their shoes and understand. And at the same time, let's be careful not to commiserate and make it worse. We have to be careful not to just constantly bring that down. Oh, you must be feeling so stressed. You must be completely overwhelmed. And oh, that's got to be terrible. I don't know how you're handling it, and that sort of stuff. Be careful. We need to empathize. We need to encourage. Now, when we encourage, that doesn't mean we're going to ignore the problem. It doesn't mean like, oh, this is stressful. You'll get over it and you'll be fine. But it's things like, I've known you for the last 2 years, and you have shown me ways in which you have been able to achieve certain things. I know you have the strength to meet this challenge and to overcome it. You can do it. I know it. I've seen it. You're going to do it again. And I know it's stressful now. I know it's overwhelming now. I know it feels like you can't do it, but trust me, you can. You got this. Those sort of things where we start encouraging without ignoring the problem, that can be a big, big thing that helps to, build that social support and helps them know that you're on their side. You still believe in them, but you're also that adult who not only believes in them, but the adult who's going to constantly be pushing them. That adult that says, yeah, you got this. Now keep going. Keep going. You got this. And name the issue intentionally. Don't just say, oh, this has got to be super stressful for you, or you can't handle this, or whatever. Name the issue. So what you're telling me is you feel like you've got a lot of work to do, but you don't see how you can get it done in the next 3 hours. Be intentional by what it is, and then together start to map things out. Have you ever experienced that before? Have you ever felt like you had too much to do and not a lot of time? Yeah. How did you approach that last time? Okay, what are some things we could work on? What are some things you want to do differently this time around? Do you need my help scaffolding it? I think you can do this. That's first step, where you name the issue intentionally and you work through it together. That makes a big difference in terms of enhancing social support, but being more than just an ear to listen to, actually being somebody who's going to hear them, understand them, empathize with them, and then keep pushing them, because they need that. They need people who are going to keep pushing them a bit. Now, the third big thing that we think about when it comes to stressful events comes down to this idea of accumulation and amplification, accumulating those stressful events. Like I said at the start, we can easily take one sort of one-off stressful event, experience it, and then sort of pass it off to the side. Be like, all right, I got over that. I'm okay. It's when they all pile up at once. And what I'm sharing with you right now, this image is a snapshot of obviously an Excel document of our deadlines for the IB Diploma Program. Now, I'm not ignorant. I know that any Diploma Program coordinator visiting me right now, you set up your deadlines for the whole year and you carefully unpick these. And it's really important that we do so. I'm sharing this way. This is how I set it up for our school. It's an Excel document. Everything in dark gray is a weekend. Everything in light gray is a holiday. And then each sort of area, subject area, is highlighted in a different color. And wherever it's darker, that indicates that students are working on that thing at that time. It really helps all teachers understand what the students are going through, because it's more than just saying a list of deadlines. It's more than, on the 13th of January, this, and on the 16th of January, this, and on the 17th of January, this. It's more so they can understand, okay, yes, on the 13th of January, you've got your German A oral, but you've also, if you're in economics, you're also working on your IA number 3 at that time. And if you're in biology, you're also doing that IA. So there's a lot actually happening. Just having this alone allows you as the teacher to empathize a little bit more, to understand what they're going through and what's happening in all their plates at the same time. Now, it's more than that, because obviously you can schedule things on ManageBack, you can schedule things on whatever sort of process or platform you're using to help communicate with students. But what's nice about this is it helps to give more context and helps people see what's going on. So first and foremost, carefully plan your deadlines. We've got ours coming up in 2 weeks' time, where we're going to be planning our deadlines for the next academic year. And basically, I'll show our deadlines from this year, and we're going to have a negotiation. We're going to see what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to change. But on top of that, we've got part of our student government, we've got an academic prefect who is in charge of the diploma program. So we have a diploma program prefect. I invite that person in to talk with me about it. Say, hey, these are the deadlines. This is what's coming up. Any pressure points, any key things that you feel like we're not going to be able to handle? What's sort of standing out to you? What's a problem? And you'll notice in this diagram here, anything that's highlighted red is a major deadline. So it's a big thing. You as a diploma coordinator or you as the school leader, you notice, here's a pressure point. There's some big stuff. In this 1 week, there's 4 major assignments coming in at once. Let's be mindful. Let's be careful what's going on here. Now, when you carefully plan those deadlines, that also means you have to show little flexibility if there's a change. Now, I know that seems counterintuitive. We're always talking about being flexible. But in this case, when you form those deadlines and you share them out, you have to be rigid. Keep them strong, because you're not protecting you. You're not protecting teachers. You're protecting the students right now. Anytime another teacher or somebody becomes wishy-washy with these deadlines and says, but I just figured I'd give them an extension because this, they may not realize that by giving an extension on, for example, that German A oral on the 13th and pushing it over to Monday the 16th, they've just compounded quite a few deadlines on the same day. So you have to involve a process anytime a deadline wants to be changed. That process could be just as simple as insisting that when your teachers want to make a change, they contact you. And that way you have that oversight and you're overseeing the whole process to make sure that your students are protected. They know what's coming up because you share this. You share these deadlines with them at the start of the whole program. They know what's going to come up. So they're expecting this, and you've got to protect those expectations. And that means that unfortunately, you've got to be pretty rigid on this, and you have to involve the process. Finally, with that, publish a full academic year in advance, at least. Get those stuff out there very early so that students can plan accordingly. So they know this is a pressure point. This is when I need to do stuff, and here's how I can work on it. Now, those 3 areas are going to help quite a bit, but as you might guess, there's even more in terms of helping our students find the IB diploma program to be achievable and enjoyable. There's more than just this, because stress it's neither a good nor a bad thing. We need some, as I showed earlier with the bell curve. We need some to get out of the bed in the morning. We need that cortisol to get us going, but too much can be unhelpful. If we are experiencing those high levels of stress, it's because we tend to perceive that our resources or our capability is insufficient. We're unable to meet the challenge that we think we're facing. So we need to reduce this stress by improving the resources and working on the capability of the individual so they can actually deal with that challenge. And some of those things I just covered help to do that. But let's dive into some other practical things that you can do to help improve the resources available for that person, as well as their capability. Starting with the resources, okay? Here, I've put a picture of a long-term study plan example. Key things that they can do. Now, obviously, it's another Excel document, and it's a little bit small, but if you were to look into this a little bit more detailed, on the first column, we have the timings of the day, and then we've got what they're doing all throughout the week. What I've highlighted in orange are specific times where the student can study, or where they have dedicated individual time that they could be doing stuff. And what I've highlighted in green is time to get outside or sort of free time, activities, and that sort of stuff as well. At the bottom, there's simple calculations in terms of, how many hours does that person want to be dedicating to that study per week. Now, why do I scaffold this? And you might be looking at this going, well, that's great, John, but not everybody's going to study that way. And I agree with you. But just because everybody studies a different way doesn't mean that we should not show them ways in which they could. Because so many times I've heard people go, well, they're in the diploma program now, they should know how to study. Or they're old enough now, they've figured it out. Too often we assume that students understand how to study when we actually haven't taught them. We need to be sure that we teach how to do time management, that we teach how to plan. Here are the resources. Here's how you can work this through. You might come up with something else. That's cool. You can do that. Here's some things that definitely work. And we need to actually teach that time management. Yes, when you go over it, there might be some students who are like, I've got my own system and I know what's going on. But that's just differentiation, right? When you're doing your introduction to the diploma program, differentiate it. You might have some people who already have something going on. You might have some people who definitely don't. Work with that and actually teach them time management and planning. Be authentic and respectful. So be sure that you're clearly articulating, here's the challenge. I'm going to expect that you're matching the time in class with the time outside of class. That's going to be my challenge to you. How much time you're spending in class, I want you to be studying outside of class as well, working through this as well. And it might be less than that, right? But be authentic and clear and respectful with what's going on. This is what's going on. This is the challenge. And when you clearly outline it in terms of the timings like this, you realize, and the student realizes as well, there's a lot of empty space in here actually. I actually do have a lot of time where I can go do the stuff I enjoy. And even on a daily basis, I've got a couple hours every day where I could be doing something. And I've also got a couple hours every day where I could be studying. So I'm actually working on those things consistently. So I teach the study skills, how they can actually work through it. I teach the time management as well. Because I love this quote, and chances are you've already read it, but that quote that's attributed to the US Navy says, under pressure, you don't rise to the challenge. You sink to the level of your training. And that's why we train so hard. So we've got to train, we've got to teach, we've got to be authentic and clearly articulate what students can do so that they know how to manage their time and so they've got those study skills. Now, talking about study skills, let's get into this. This is a great graphic that was produced by Dr. Chu in 2021. And I'm actually not going to talk all the way through it for the moment. I'm going to pause, have a read through this, and just notice the usefulness of this visual. I'll give you a second. Now, when it comes to study skills, again, we tend to assume that students have already figured it out by the time they get to the diploma program. We tend to think, oh, you're 17 years old now, you should know. But that's a really unfair and unempathetic response. Instead, what we need to recognize is that in some cases, students may have come across the wrong ways of studying or things that are not actually useful for them. When it comes to studying and performing on diploma program exams, the key thing is students are trying to take things from an initial sensory memory and put it into that long-term memory. Yeah? And they need to be able to flip between long-term memory and working memory pretty easily in these upcoming exams. And what this graphic does, it really helps to identify some of the choke points, some of the pitfalls that our students are going to come into, and now what we can do as well. Share this with your students, show the graphic, clarify it with them, and then you yourself also teach some of these key things. One of the things that really stood out to me is over here. As we try to go from working memory into long-term memory, one of the biggest pitfalls is students often prefer the least effective study strategies for long-term learning. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Anybody who's watching this right now, you know when you tell a student to study and to prepare, chances are they probably open a book and they'll just start reading all the stuff over and again. But we know that that's one of the least effective ways to turn things into long-term memory. You've got to be elaboratively rehearsing. You've got to be scaffolding this sort of stuff. You've got to set up quiz questions. You got to access that memory in different ways than just rereading and rereading and rereading. So teach study skills. Take the time and actually invest in it. And I know what you're saying, or I can guess what you're probably thinking. I'm a diploma program teacher. I've got 240 hours to teach my class to get through all the content in the higher level, and I can't actually do it. Why would I dedicate time to study skills? But when you do it, it'll make a massive difference. And of course, study skills change per subject. The way in which somebody should study for a language and literature course is different to how they should study for a mathematics course and how they should study for their sciences. So naturally, as the subject expert, you got to take it on you to say, here's the best way to actually study for this session. Here's how we're going to get past these choke points and how we're going to get past these, pitfalls so that we can take this sensory information and make sure that it gets to long-term memory. I'm going to rely on more than the fact that I taught this once and now you have to know it. I'm going to use good pedagogy, good practices to make sure that you know all this sort of stuff when you need to know it. So take the time. Teach time management, teach the study skills, right? When you do those things, it is going to make a big, big difference so that young people feel empowered. They feel like they can achieve all this stuff. And when you do those things, and again, it's a practice. I'm not saying this is one-off, and I'm not saying that every single student that's in our building right now isn't experiencing stress, right? But I will say that when you focus on some of those things, you do end up creating a meaningful, enjoyable, and achievable experience. I want to tell a brief story here. I've got these photos, and basically these photos encompass a wonderful story that took place at our school a few years ago and continues to take place now. And basically it happened from one of our teachers here, Mr. Fleming. He's a phenomenal chemistry teacher, a head of science. And basically he was able to organize a way in which our students here could collaborate with university postdocs on research on the aurora borealis, but beyond that, the aurora of Jupiter. Now, of course, aurora around here, we commonly call them like the northern lights, but effectively the aurora of Jupiter. And what this entailed was after school sort of club, and students would come in, they'd start, working through the data and kind of understanding a little bit more. Now, in order to work through that type of data that was coming in, they were applying all the things they were learning in the diploma program. They were learning data analysis, they were working through their math stuff, they were, criticizing what they were learning, evaluating what was there, constantly working through it. So you can see them working with multiple people, and this is one of the individuals that they started to share some of the research with. Now, later on, they ended up going on a trip, right? And part of that trip was to visit the universities where they had been collaborating with. But beyond that, to go all the way up to Tromsø, Norway, when the Northern Lights happened to be, somewhat most active, and they could actually go and experience it themselves. And they were able to kind of see, some of the things that they had thought of. But at the same time that they were out there, checking out the Northern Lights, they came in because that night the paper had been published and Mr. Fleming had printed it out, but they didn't know. And he had brought it to them that evening. So they had just gone out and they were watching this Northern Lights show. Then he invited them inside, and here they are. You can see him by flashlight watching this paper that had been published by university postdocs, and each of their names was on that paper as a contributor as well. They had such, not just enjoyable. I mean, it's enjoyable to do certain things and to go to, see the Northern Lights and go on a trip together. But beyond that, it was meaningful. It was impactful work. And they were doing stuff. They were bringing their diploma program skills to the forefront as they worked with, university professors across the globe. And they achieved something. And by doing those certain things, they started to see that what they were doing was far more than just the diploma program. It was far more than just, earning a diploma so they could get onto university. They were focusing on something that was really meaningful. And when I talk about that, I say that's the main thing in the diploma program. If we get caught up talking about, exams in May or in exams in November, if anybody from Australia happens to be here as well, but if we get caught up just talking about the exams, we're not talking about the main thing anymore. Because the main thing about the diploma program is not the assessments. The main thing is not the internal assessments or the external assessments. The main thing is that they're going to learn something really cool. They're going to grow. Young people that come through this diploma program are going to experience things that they haven't done before. They're going to learn more about themselves and realize that they can achieve stuff they didn't think they could. If you keep that the main thing, that's going to be a bigger impact. And it's going to mean so much more to their well-being and their self-efficacy. They're going to realize they can do stuff. And when we talk about the diploma program in general, it's not just a step in the right direction. If we find ourselves constantly saying, well, you've got to do this so that you can get onto university, and then you got to do university so that you can go into a job, and then maybe you can do something impactful, I'm sorry, but that's just the worst. You got to talk about something that's impactful right now. We're going to do something now because it's enjoyable and it's impactful. I'm a biology teacher. I'm teaching the ecology unit right now. And instead of giving an assessment at the end of this unit, the key thing that I'm asking for my students is action. I say, you're going to learn some stuff that's super important in this lesson right now and in these next few weeks. And I'm going to measure your learning on this based off of the action you take from it. How are you going to take the information that we're learning in this classroom right now and make sure that it does not stay in this room? It's got to get out there. The people who aren't in this room, they deserve to know this as well. How are you going to make sure that they know that? What action are you going to take to be sure that people out there are going to experience the ecological knowledge that you now have? That shifts this whole thing on its head. And it's no longer about, oh, I got to get a 7 so that I can make my parents happy or so that I can meet my own expectations. Suddenly it's about, I'm doing something meaningful and I'm doing something that's going to have an impact on others. So talk about it in the correct way. Make sure that we're saying this is not just a step in the right direction. It's about something more. And when you do that, you provide opportunities for impact. And when students feel like they're going to have an impact, boy, they're going to jump at that. And that suddenly flips this thing. And no longer are we, they're going to feel stressful moments. They're going to feel like there's a lot going on, but they're also going to feel like it's going to matter. And I love this quote. Now, everybody who's an educator, you probably know about Angela Duckworth, right? Talking about grit. And this is a quote that she has in that book as well. Super important. If you're never able to tolerate a little bit of pain and discomfort, you'll never get better. And so when we talk about the diploma program, when our students go through it, yes, it's challenging. Yeah, it's overwhelming in some cases, but it's also achievable and it's also enjoyable, and they can do it. And when we as the educators help to scaffold these things for them, and we start to put in place the policies and the procedures, and we are intentional with our words, we're intentional with events, and we're intentional with deadlines and all that sort of stuff. We're very clear about these things up front, and we tell them, yeah, you are going to experience some challenge, but you're going to do it. They're going to see some success. In the background here, you see a few students here, and they just completed our DARE race. And our DARE race is basically an adventure race. This year, it's 32 kilometers they've got to run, and it's interspersed with a bunch of different challenges, from rock climbing to paddleboarding and swimming and all sorts of stuff. It is a grueling task. It is super challenging. These 4 students are coming in at the finish line. And not one of them looks overwhelmed, stressed, or like, oh, that was the worst thing I ever went through. That's pride right there. That's people proud of what they achieved because they took on something that was demanding. They took on something that was challenging, and they succeeded. That's what the diploma program is. So let's make sure that we're framing this in the right way, and that we're doing these things so that our young people can go through that little bit of pain, that little bit of discomfort, and come out the other side stronger. And that's some of the key things I wanted to share with you with regard to student well-being and the IB Diploma Program, and our philosophy here in terms of how we can make this a meaningful, achievable, and enjoyable experience. Again, we don't have it all figured out. Not every single student's this way, feeling totally perfect about it, but it's a practice, and we keep going for it. Thanks so much for letting me share some ideas, and I'm more than happy to receive some questions.
We'll get to the questions in just a second. I have to say, I think we saved the best for last, John.
Oh, come on now.
And I'll tell you why. For me, one of the things that has really shifted through your discussion is you are allowing impact, action to take place within the DP program. And I think so often we have the tendency to kind of shut down. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. You got to start writing. You got to go home. You got to do this. And there's not that sense of, I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it for my parents. I'm doing it for those 7s, as you mentioned, and all those parental pressures. And for me, you are providing a bit of a light about how we as a school, and I'll speak about my school here in Ostrava, we should feel a little bit more empowered to really jump in and make things happen for the kids. Let's continue all the good work that we're doing in the PYP and the MYP, and let's continue to try, and we are trying, but let's continue to try to not have such a huge focus just on the grades at the end of the day. As you said, happy kids who are doing work that they enjoy, they'll get good grades. And yeah, let's try to focus on that a bit more, I guess.
You're absolutely right. If we focus too much on grades, then we get kids that are just focused on competition with their peers, and they kind of miss out on what's cool about learning, So, no, I love it. That's so well paraphrased. I really appreciate your reflection on that, Brett. Thanks.
We do have a bunch of questions that have popped up over the course of the presentation. I don't know if you'd like me to try to read them for you, or you can see them yourself. Is there one you'd like to react to? They get a little bit wordy, some of these questions.
Yeah, actually, if you got the chance to maybe kind of paraphrase it, I'd appreciate that. That'd be great.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'll do a great job, but one of the questions was, I wonder what strategies you have for encouraging growth mindset in the parents and background culture of the students, where the emphasis is very often, I'll tell you, I'll just read it because there's a lot to this question. Take in mind the parents, the background culture of the students, where the emphasis is very often so much about scores, grades, marks, victories, And those parents who freak out about failure and see it as a sign of problems rather than progress, how much as a school are we expected to address, manage, or handle that direction of pressure?
Yeah, and thanks for reading that out, Brett. I really appreciate that. And I can see that's, Thomas, you have identified a serious barrier to student enjoyment of learning. So what I didn't mention earlier is I'm doing a lot of research right now in educational psychology. I'm working on my doctorate in what affects student motivations for learning. And a major factor comes down to parental pressures and what they are expecting of young people. Now, certain strategies, you're talking about what are the strategies that can really be useful. And the first ones that come to mind are invite them in. Invite the parents in. When you create those events, where the students are showing off their achievements, if they're showing off their IAs, or they're showing off their, their art exhibition or their TOK exhibition, whatever it is, invite the parents as well. Bring them in, because then they're going to see that there's actually more going on here than just getting a grade. And especially if you get the chance to chat with them in that sort of informal session. A parent-student teacher conference is pretty formal, and it can be intimidating for everybody involved, actually. Not just the student, the parent, but also you as the teacher. But when you're in those events and you've invited the parents there, you can start to talk about their kid in really great ways. Often what parents want is to know that their kid is doing well, and to know that they're going to be all right. And they recognize that you're spending a lot of time with them and you offer perspective. They know that you are a role model and a mentor for them. So when you tell them things like, I'm so impressed with the way that your child tackled this problem. They continue to meet some challenges. They kept working through it, but man, they learned this skill. They built this thing up, and you can see it here. Look, this, and this. When you constantly bring it back to that, and when you're able to use that as an artifact to show it, that makes a big difference. Now, I also recognize in international schools, you can't get your parents to every event. So set up live streaming. I mean, if COVID didn't teach us anything, COVID taught us we can live stream just about everything, right? So bring it in and make sure that they have the chance to experience as well. Show it off. Get your marketing department to go around with, cameras and whatnot and put together a small clip that they can put into your social media channels. And that way the parents get to see, like, there's more stuff going on here than just assignments to earn a grade. That won't fix everything. Like I said, Thomas, you've identified a major barrier. But I think that's one strategy that helps.
Erin also is asking, she writes, I love the STEM celebration. What other kinds of events do you do? And I know you just kind of listed some of them, but are there any more that pop out in your mind, areas of celebration that we can be filming and sending off to our parents?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, Erin, great question. And, this is one of these strategies that I feel like you can kind of create anything from it. We do maths evenings, for example. We do obviously the TOK exhibition is a required element, but just, an easy win, if you will. We do different speaker events where we'll have people come in to speak, but on top of that, we might have students introduce that in sort of different events that sort of show off their stuff. We do a CAS exhibition. So our grade 12 students, when they finish their CAS, we have them put together a series of things. Here's my portfolio, and this is what I did. And here's a couple of videos of the things that I took place in. You can kind of create an event from anything, really. The only barrier is time and space, but if you think about that creatively, then you can make it happen. You can say, look, here's a time where I can carve out 20 minutes, even if it's only 20 minutes, and I want students to just sort of show what they've done, and we're going to have the school kind of roll through it during a break time or during lunch. You can create events, and when you do, you can make it from just about anything, and I think that's hopefully a really empowering thing, recognizing that you've got the capability to make whatever you want from this.
I guess we'll need to close in a moment, but inspired by one of my podcast heroes, Ezra Klein, I'll close off with a couple of book mentions. Tom is recommending a book by Sandra McGuire called Teach Students How to Learn, and another book called Teach Yourself How to Learn, which is all about how to teach metacognitive study skills, and really makes the case that studying isn't something we should trust students to just figure out how to do. He writes, there's a lot we can teach, strategies and skills. Her book really sets up a good program and makes it easier to articulate to students how to manage their study time. Are you familiar with that book at all, John?
You know, I haven't come across it yet. Thanks, Tom. Always looking for more stuff to read. I mean, you can see behind me here, I'm constantly looking for stuff. So I appreciate that. I'll check it out.
And you were referring several times today to this book. Maybe if we hold it up there for a bit longer, again, what every teacher needs to know about psychology. And the author is David Didow.
Yeah, David Didow, Rose. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is the one that's got some great stuff in it. Highly recommend this one. Another book that has helped quite a bit in terms of pedagogy is Lazy Teacher's Handbook. That's this guy here. It has a funny title, but it's great, especially with differentiation tactics and ways that you can be encouraging and how to, make young people feel like they've got that self-efficacy and they can do what they're hoping for. So a couple books that I recommend here as well. But I'm talking to educators. We're constantly reading. We're looking for ways to get better. So I know that there's lots of good stuff out there.
John Patton from St. Gilgen's International School in Austria, thank you so much for such a meaningful presentation about working with stress in the DP. A lot of advice in there, and I know I'm going to be recommending for my entire staff that they have a look at this presentation. I think it will help us make the next step and really try to help our kids out. So, John, thank you very much for joining. Be well.
And congratulations to you and the whole team. Thanks so much for putting together this AGM. This has been fantastic, really great to be a part of. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. It's been really great.
Well, for us as well. So everybody, thank you for joining these last 3 days. It's been our pleasure. We've learned a lot about how not to do some things technically and a bunch of things about how we can make this work. And we'll look forward to putting another such event on in the near future. Be well. It's been a long day. Tomorrow's Friday. One more. We can make it. Enjoy the evening. Thank you. Goodbye.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye, guys.
Record